They're ready to go? Yeah. Okay. If I don't. So I'll go ahead and call the meeting of the school board to order. Welcome, everyone, and take roll call. I see all trustees are present with the exception of Ann Wake, who's not here, and Trustee Decker is attending virtually. Everyone else is here in person. So with that, let's go ahead and stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So item number 3 on the agenda is to review, revise, and approve the agenda. Is there any request from any trustee to make a revision to the agenda? I'm not seeing any hands go up, so we'll go ahead and go through the meeting tonight under the agenda as has been sent out. Number 4 is to approve the minutes from the Board of Trustees regular meeting on September 8th, 2020. First, are there any requests to make any modifications to those minutes? See no hands going up. Then is there a motion to approve the minutes from the regular meeting on September 8th, 2020? Moved by Trustee Lorenzen, seconded by Trustee McDonald. All those in favor of approving the meeting minutes from September 8th, please indicate by raising your hand. And I see all trustees have raised their hand, so the minutes are approved. Now we move to public comment on non-agenda items. As we have explained, we ask members of the public who want to make public comment on any item that's not on the agenda tonight to say their first and last name, spell either first or last name if it has an unusual spelling. If you represent an organization, identify the organization. And we ask members of the public to keep your comments to 3 minutes per speaker. And so with that, I'm thinking I'll try to be looking for hands up. And the way to raise your hand in Zoom is to click on the participants, and down at the bottom in the lower right, there is a way to click and it says raise hand, and a blue hand comes up. And that will help me identify people who want to make public comment. And so it looks like there's someone who's identified as Tyler's iPad. If you want to unmute yourself and make public comment on any non-agenda item, please go ahead and do so.
Yes, my name is Tyler Smith. I live here in Missoula. I've had 3 children that have gone through high school at Missoula Sentinel. I currently have a son that is a sophomore there and also have a son that's at Meadow Hill. So my comment is concerning allowing fans, both home team fans and visiting fans, attend activities, mainly high school football here in Missoula. There's 7 metros across the state, and they're allowing for visiting fans. For some reason, Missoula is not. There seems like there's a lot of blame game going on between, hey, this is the governor's directive, which it's not. He specifically said in his directive when he went to phase 2 that anything as it relates to high school activity or school activities is exempt from his order. The health department does not control what the school board or school trustees do. We don't need to have their permission to come up and use some common sense. We had a game last weekend, Missoula Sentinel versus Helena Capital, and a number of fans came over from Helena and they had to sit outside the fence, a few feet away from the stands that they would normally be able to sit into, and it just doesn't make any sense. There is no dialogue going on in between the parents back and forth. We're hearing things second or third hand, and I would appreciate if we can use some common sense. I mean, they figured it out over in Butte last week. Across the state of Montana, the other metros, up in Kalispell and in Great Falls and in Bozeman and in Billings, we have figured out a way to do this. There is no reason why the students shouldn't be able to go, or the step parents shouldn't be able to go, or the grandparents shouldn't be able to go, or my other sons should not be able to go and attend a game. Your job as the school board is not to worry about the safety of me or my other children or the students when they're not involved in school. So I would appreciate if we can, use some common sense and take this up as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. And let me see. Ann Roush, if you want to unmute yourself and make public comment.
Hi, my name is Ann Roush. It's Rausch. And I just want to reiterate a lot of things that Tyler said. I have two sons that go to Sentinel High School and play football. And for these kids, it's a lot more than just playing football. We have a large family that lives in Missoula, and it is killing the grandparents. It's killing the aunts and uncles. TJ and Trevor have two little nephews that are 3 and 5 that look up to him and adore them and want to come. And I just think that that's important for, especially TJ. It's his senior year. These are things that you as a school board cannot give back to these kids. And they deserve to have their family who loves and supports them. And we need to embrace more of a family unit. And they also deserve to have the pep band playing at the game. They deserve to have the cheerleaders and the dance team. They deserve to have student body in the seats. And they deserve to do that when our stadium is big enough to do that safely. You can fit over 1,000 people in MCPS stadium and still continue social distancing and safety. And I just feel very frustrated at the lack of transparency from MCPS and the board of directors as to where your stance is on this. And there's been no communication to the parents and the students as to where your stand is. That it's my understanding that MCPS needs to submit a formal plan to the health department. That has not been done to my knowledge. And then when we hear from MCPS, we hear that no, the health department need to change their stance on it. And it's really frustrating because everyone's playing the blame game and we're getting no answers. And I really implore you guys to take a step forward, submit a plan to the Missoula County Health Department and fight for our kids. That's why you were elected.
Thank you. And looks like Joe Fisher. Mr. Fisher, if you want to unmute and make public comment on a non-agenda item.
Thank you. My name is Joe Fisher, Fischer. I'm a teacher at Sentinel High School and also a member of MEA and a building rep at Sentinel High School. First of all, I really want to thank the district for creating a very transparent policy for reopening. Unlike a lot of districts around here, it was very transparent and you involved parents and teachers. So I appreciate that. I would really urge the board to continue to embrace the data and metrics that you embraced during the summer for reopening and really the modeling that led us to the hybrid model. And frankly, as I look at the 30-day trends in Missoula County, they're not good. They're bad in Missoula County as well as the University of Montana. And I would encourage the board to embrace the data that leading to a hybrid model. Of course, the number one duty of staff in any school is to protect the health and safety of our students. And I give the district a lot of credit for embracing not being first, but being safe. And so far, our cases have been pretty low. And I would encourage the district to continue to follow the hybrid model. And I am very concerned about opening up with all our students right now at the high school level. And I can really only speak to myself or for myself and my experience that it has been safe. The students have been very compliant with all the requirements that we have. And I really appreciate how difficult this is for parents, especially in elementary. I can't imagine. Both my kids are out, and I really feel for the elementary parents in particular. I would just really ask the district to be incredibly cautious. Again, I would say it's better to be safe than first. And I am a complete supporter of the hybrid model, and I would encourage the district to consider greatly continuing this until the end of semester 1. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. And just to clarify, there is an item under 8A1 where the board will be discussing a recommendation concerning what model is being followed in the high school. And so that's a better fit for when making public comment about what method you prefer, hybrid, going back to school. So this is a time for public comment on non-agenda items, but I appreciate Mr. Fisher. We'll take your comments into consideration when we get to that agenda item.
Thank you, I apologize.
Oh, no, that's okay. I should have clarified at the beginning, so thank you. And it looks like Tom McClintock has his hand up. Mr. McClintock, if you want to unmute and make public comment on a non-agenda item.
Yes, good evening. I hadn't actually planned on speaking on a non-agenda item, but following two previous comments, I just want to urge the school board to not allow families into football games. I recognize, as someone who was heavily involved in high school sports, and I was in pep band and jazz band and speech and debate, wrestling. Yes, not having grandparents there is incredibly sad, but so is losing a family member. And an ironic choice of words to say that not being there is killing these grandparents when it's been shown that COVID might do that a bit more permanently. So just maybe don't bring families into sports arenas. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And it looks like Matthew Rich has his hand up if you want to unmute and make any public comment on a non-agenda item. And again, thank you everyone for keeping your comments to 3 minutes.
Hi, Matt Rich. I realize that the comment period for agenda items is a little bit later, but I did want to piggyback off of Mr. Fisher regarding the data. I wanted to make sure that you guys had a chance to see the most current data before the board had a chance to discuss it. The most current data is this regarding where our COVID cases are at. As we know, it usually takes about 2 weeks for COVID cases to start appearing after infections have occurred. So you'll have to excuse how difficult it is for me to move. This was our start date for school, and this is precisely where 2 weeks after the start of school is. So just making sure that we are following data. I want to piggyback off of Mr. Fisher there. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it looks like there's a telephone number whose last 3 digits are 527. If you want to unmute yourself and identify yourself with the first and last name and go ahead and make public comment. It looks like that person's hand went back down again at that phone number. It's over here. So I'm looking for other hands raised for public. I'm sorry, I'm just looking through the participant list for hands raised to make public comment on a non-agenda item. I apologize for the delay. It takes a minute to look through the list of participants. And it looks, so Lucia Olson has raised her hand. Ms. Olson, if you'd like to make public comment on a non-agenda item, please unmute yourself.
Okay, let's see, there we go. So first of all, somehow I'm on my daughter's account. I'm actually Kim Olson. I'm a 5th grade teacher at Paxson. And I just wanted to make a comment about the district hopefully being able to offer living wages to all of our employees on the district. I did notice on the employment page, for example, but we all know that substitutes get paid $11 an hour, and they're required to have a 4-year college degree. Many of these are aspiring teachers as well. And I noticed that many of the sports coaches, for example, a middle school cross-country coach who requires a minimum of a high school diploma is getting $27 an hour. Our noon duty aides who do have vital roles in keeping our children safe on the playground are only getting $9 an hour. So I'm just hoping that somehow the board can be active in really raising the wages for all of our employees across the district, especially substitutes who we need. So thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. Let me check one more time on the participants list. I'm not seeing any other public comment. Oh. So someone with the first initial S and a hyphen Crews, C-R-E-W-S. If you want to unmute yourself and identify yourself by first and last name and go ahead and make public comment on a non-agenda item.
My name is Scott Cruz. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
I might have.
Yep.
Scott Cruz. I have 2 sons that go to Missoula Sentinel, one senior, one junior. And my public comment also relates back to the athletics, and not only athletics, but honestly, all performances at the school and the attendance of spectators that need to be there. I think part of my biggest issue is, out of all of this that has gone down, I don't know if people are actually really thinking about what this age bracket from K to 12 has really had to kind of set aside, because their age group is not as susceptible as some of the other ones. And I realize there's people in that age bracket with compromised immune systems and all the other stuff. But it seems like this age group is really getting punished severely to make sure that other older age groups and people with compromised immune systems. So I would like you guys to really think about what we're doing mentally and socially to these kids. I guess when I think of it, my kids miss going to watch the volleyball games and the soccer games and being there to cheer on their friends that they've grown up with. So I think it needs to be addressed somewhere within you guys to think about not only increasing attendance for the adults, but also for the students. I am not a lawyer, but at the Capitol game, which was on Friday, there was a player from Helena Capital that did something to his shoulder. I'm not sure exactly what he did, but he left the game. And from what I was told, his parents were not allowed to come in to assist. So it seems like there's some liability issues there. If someone from that team, the visiting team, gets hurt, and someone besides a coach or a bus driver has to take him to a hospital, which I know has occurred at other games type of deal. So please take into considerations the kids, their emotions, how much time they're already spending on their screens at home with phones and on Zoom meetings and in virtual classes. I think it'd be beneficial to try and get them out and have them interacting with each other on a person-to-person basis instead of just over the phone Snapchatting or TikToking or whatever they do. So thank you for your time. I appreciate you guys. Best of luck.
Thank you, and I'll check again. It looks like Allie Diamond has his or her hand up. If you want to unmute yourself and identify yourself and make your public comment on a non-agenda item, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. My name is Allie, or Allison Diamond, so Alison, and the last name is Dimond. And I also wanted to make a comment about athletics. First of all, I wanted to thank the athletic directors at all of the schools, because I know that they are putting a lot of thought into very careful planning, trying to make things safe, while also giving students a chance to participate in athletics, recognizing all of the comments from other folks about how important athletics are for kids' emotional and health otherwise. But I also think athletics are a really high risk area. There's a lot of contact between players, certainly, but there's also a lot of opportunity for spreading the virus with having more fans in the stands. So I just really want to advise or recommend everyone think about the fact that this is a once in a century situation. I know it's hard for all the parents, the grandparents, the nephews, the cousins, etc., who want to be at these games. I absolutely understand that, but this is a very rare situation. I really think we all need to have some patience about not getting back to normal too quickly. I mean, it's not normal times, and we can't act like it's normal times. So I would advise the school district and the athletic directors to continue to not allow large groups. I would recommend them to not allow having spectators, maybe at all, but certainly not visiting spectators. Those parents can be there and be near the stadium or near wherever the sporting event is happening in case there is some kind of injury or they need to take care of their kid, but they don't need to be crowded into the area, into the actual spectator area, where we're increasing risk of spreading this virus, which is a very once in a lifetime, we hope, situation. So I would hope you would consider sort of being patient about the situation and how rare this circumstance is and taking it seriously. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And someone with the first name Marissa has her hand raised. If you can unmute yourself and identify yourself by your first and last name and go ahead and make public comment.
My name is Marissa McClintock, Marissa, McClintock, MCCLINTOCK. Allie, very well said. Couldn't agree more. I think these are unprecedented times. As a librarian, I was recently asked to bring a cart of books on 9/11 and speak to some of my children about 9/11. And it was really interesting. They all asked, where were you? What were you doing? What were you thinking? I think we are living in similarly unprecedented and interesting times that in the future, we will be asked about by our children and grandchildren. And I want to say that we taught them that it wasn't just about them. I feel for the kids, I absolutely do, but in a time when 160 people have died in our state and 200,000 in our nation, it's time to not think about us and to think about safety. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you for your public comment, and let me check. I am not seeing any other hands raised. And my IT person has indicated he checked too and has not seen any other hands raised for public comment on a non-agenda item. So we'll go ahead and move on to 6A, which is the Health Insurance Trust Fund report. There is correspondence attached to the agenda that trustees all have had access to. So thank you for sending in written correspondence as well. And so Health Insurance Trust Fund report is found on page 14. It's for the month of July and August. And that is just a report. And then we move on to 6B, which is announcements from superintendent. So Dr. Watson, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you, Chair Holland. I just have a couple of announcements this evening. So, first of all, welcome Paul tonight. So Paul is helping us with IT. You probably noticed Hatton wasn't here, but Hatton's on the Zoom right now. But Paul is here helping with IT, so really appreciate your help, Paul, and giving up some time this evening. I also wanted to give the board an update on our strategic planning process. And I know it's been a few months, but last winter, in January, we started a strategic planning process with the help and the aid and the facilitation of the Montana School Boards Association. And they're still actively involved in this process. We had 2 community sessions. We were scheduled to have our 3rd session in March, late March, right before the schools closed. So once we went into school closure, we didn't schedule that meeting. We just kind of have been holding off on that 3rd meeting. So the intention was, just to remind everyone about the process, the intention was getting some community feedback on the strategic plan as we start to develop the next strategic plan for the next 5 to 10 years. And then bringing that community feedback, into creating a draft document, and then having a larger community give feedback on that. And eventually, the new strategic plan would be adopted by the school board. So we're a little far from there. We're time took a stall on that. But what I would like to report, just real briefly, is the Montana School Boards Association, under the guidance of Deborah Silk, who you may remember was here sort of facilitating, the Montana School Boards Association has taken that community feedback and started to create some draft statements. They're not complete at all. They're just a rough draft. We need to have at least 1 more community listening session, maybe 2. We're going to try to figure out how to do that over Zoom. And what we're going to do is share some of these initial drafts with the community, similar to the group that we had in this room last year. If you participated in that, we had community members, we had teachers, we had administrators. We'll pull that group back together for a couple of more listening sessions between now and December. And then we'd have sort of a final draft that we'd put out for community public comment for a couple of meetings, with the hope that by January we'd have sort of a finished document with the board's consideration and possible approval. The reason I was hoping we could target January is that would give us the spring months to really start to develop the action plans around the new strategic plan. So we're going to need a few months to do that, and so that's why I was targeting January. But I just wanted to give you an update. Both Hatton and I spoke with Deborah Silk a couple weeks ago and talked about this timeline and talked about where we were at with the process. I wanted to make sure the board understands that we haven't dropped that process. We are continuing that. We just had a little pause on it, and we'll continue that in the coming months. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we come to the consent agenda. The consent agenda is a mechanism by which the board can vote on items that we see routinely that don't typically require a lot of board discussion. Any trustee can ask that an item be taken off the consent agenda if he or she wants to have a conversation about the item. But right now the recommendation is on the consent agenda to approve the revenue and expenditure reports for the months of June, July, and August 2020. And as is indicated in our agenda, the warrants are available in the business office that support the reports. So Pat, is there anything else to add?
Is it possible to ask a question? Taking it off the consent agenda.
It would be. So you can ask to have it taken off the consent agenda, and then you could ask a question. It's fine.
Okay.
So, okay, it's not on the consent agenda. So Pat, if you want to explain, just generally summarize what's there, and then if any trustees have a question for Pat, we'll take the questions.
Sure. So these are the routine monthly reports, and so we're catching up on those monthly reports. They reflect the expenditures and then the summary of the revenues and expenditures on 2 different spreadsheets for the months that are indicated.
Trustee Decker, you had a question.
Yes, thank you so much, Chair Holland. My question, Pat, Mr. McHugh, is under miscellaneous revenues year to date, it's $5,920,000. And I was just curious whether that includes the COVID-19 CARES Act funding or if that's other grants and projects. It's a lot in miscellaneous, and I was just curious.
Yeah, so you're looking at the August year-to-date?
Yeah, it's on the page 15 in the agenda.
And what I'd say is that it likely includes that, given the size. So that's where those funds would be deposited, is Fund 15, the miscellaneous program fund. Otherwise, our federal programs aren't to that extent, so that would include those funds. And the funds it wouldn't include is the CARES Act, because that's on a reimbursement basis. And those funds are about 2.2 million total. The coronavirus relief funds were actually distributed to us, and they're about 3.9 million, so that makes sense.
Thank you.
You bet.
Any other questions? Trustee Lorenzen?
A couple questions, I guess. First of all, in what areas did we save money because of our shutdown? And I know we often worry ourselves about substitute costs, and I have to think those were nil for the last 3 months of last year. So I guess any information about those things?
Yeah, you bet. And I was going to talk about those on the general fund update, but in general, just you're correct. The summary or the substitute line item did result in a pretty significant savings. We also saw it in utilities. We saw it in activities. And by and large, those were the main areas where you saw budget savings. And then your second question, sorry.
That was it. Just where did we save money?
Yeah.
Any other questions? Not seeing any hands raised. Then any public comment? Or I'm sorry, we need a motion first. Is there a motion to approve the attached revenue and expenditure reports for June, July, and August 2020? Moved by Trustee Sturbis. Is there a second? Seconded by Trustee McDonald. Is there any board discussion? Is there any public comment? I'm not seeing any hands being raised. So all trustees in favor of approving the motion to approve the attached revenue and expenditure reports for June, July, and August, please indicate by raising your hand. And it is unanimous as to all trustees present. Then we move on to item 8A1, which is to approve an in-person schedule and transition phase. And so, Dr. Watson, there's a long background information, but I think it's best if I'll turn it over to you so you can explain what the recommendation is from the administration.
Yep, thank you, Chair Holland, appreciate the opportunity. I did ask Cindy Farr to join. I'm not sure if she's still on the call. Oh, I think I see her right here.
I'm still here.
Okay, thank you, Cindy, for being patient. So those that know, you probably know this already, but Cindy Farr is the incident command person from the County Health Department for COVID-19. So in your board packet, if you look on page 24, starting on page 24, is the biweekly report that we received from the County Health Department. And I wanted to just give the board a chance to see that report, and then if you had questions on any of that data, give Cindy the floor so she could answer any questions you might have on that data that's in that report. I would also just point out that the numbers that you're seeing starting on page 24 going all the way to page 27, those are county numbers. And I have had some questions about district numbers, and I am prepared to provide that as soon as we get done asking questions of Cindy, then I'll report on the district numbers. As you can imagine, Cindy and her entire team are very busy right now with active cases and contact tracing. So I wanted to put Cindy at the start of my report and just give her a chance if you had questions for her. But as soon as we're done with that data piece, I would like to turn her loose, and because she does have to get back to her other duties with the health department. So I just, if it's okay with Chair Holland, I would just pause there and just see if you have any questions with the data starting on page 24. It goes all the way to 27, and then any of those questions on that data that Cindy might be able to answer for you.
Does anyone have any questions on Trustee Oldperson? And go ahead to ask Ms. Farr.
Thank you, Chair Holland. Ms. Farr, my question was in regards to the data, listening to the public comment tonight, how many of those are student athletes or have stemmed from student athletes or any of the family members within that area are from this data, or how is it impacting the data with having student athletes and families and different people like that attending the games?
I don't have that level of detail in this report. I could sure probably provide that at Mr. Watson's request, but that is not the level of detail that I generally deal with.
I believe Dr. Watson has some information generally about who has in the district itself. So he wanted to let Ms. Farr answer questions, and then we can not keep her on the line. So do you have another question?
Let me have this on. I understand what our role is with the school district and how we collaborate with Missoula County Health, but this is obviously impacting our athletics. And I want to know how this data is, how they're using the data for the county and how it's impacting MCPS, especially in athletics as a part of MCPS. So I wanted to know what their reasoning, their thoughts are on how they are limiting that and how we are the only district like that out of the AAs.
So I can answer my part of that if Dr. Watson wants to answer on the behalf of MCPS. This data that is being provided is not specific to MCPS. This data is being provided to every superintendent in the county. And so we are not getting down to the level of detail that you are requesting. I'm sure that if Dr. Watson would like us to provide that level of detail to him, I could designate some staff to go through every single case report to try to glean that data. But this is a report that I give out weekly to all superintendents in the district, and it's not specific to MCPS.
Yeah, and Trustee Oldperson, I think I understand the major points of your question, and I think it's not part of our agenda this evening, but it might be a very appropriate conversation for a future agenda where we talk about that process. So basically, to answer your question, I mean, we work closely with the health department on any guidance or any rules that they put out, and then one of the rules, for example, and you'll recall this from graduation, is they had a rule about crowd size with graduation and social distancing, and they required us to put forward a plan if we were going to have a ceremony. And so we went through several iterations of that plan before we got to the final one. The latest guidance from the health department was a little more strict, and it was specifically tied to football and other activities, but mainly football with the limiting of fans. That's something that we continue to discuss with the health department, and I know that they're listening to this feedback and they're continuing to discuss it as well. So it might be appropriate to have that as a separate agenda item at a future meeting.
Are there any other questions from Trustee Cohen or Mercer? A question for Ms. Farr?
I guess just simply from County Health's perspective, do you oppose us returning to 5 days a week?
We don't oppose returning to school 5 days a week. I would highly recommend that you have a very structured plan for pulling back if need be, because the report that you are looking at in your packet is from a week ago and things have changed significantly in the past week. So I do know that we have seen a pretty big spike in cases, and that will be reflected in the report that goes out to the schools tomorrow. So I would be cautiously optimistic that you would be able to return the students to in-person learning 5 days a week, but having a very clear plan for pulling back from that if need be.
Thank you, Ms. Farr. Any other questions? Trustee McDonald?
Yeah, my question is why is it that Missoula County Public Schools are the only one that are following this phase 1 when all of the other schools like Lolo, down the Bitterroot, all around us are on a full schedule, and why we're not?
I believe that's a question for Dr. Watson rather than Ms. Farr. So, and Trustee Lorenzen, did you have your hand up? Yeah. Okay.
I guess listening to Vicky's question, it's a good question, but the real question is, what about Frenchtown? Because they are in Missoula County. The other school she mentioned, Lolo's in Missoula County, but Frenchtown's not. So I guess there is, I think, a county component to this.
Yeah, I would just say that, you know, the phasing plan is definitely something that I would want to talk through this evening with you and talk about some of the decisions that were made. I think the part of the reason I was trying to separate this piece of it was just so we could preserve Cindy's time, because I know her time is valuable. So if you had specific questions on the data that she's given you, that would be the thing to ask, and then I will go into more detail about the phasing plan and sort of our recommendation after Cindy's finished.
So any other Trustee Avgaris and then Trustee Mercer with the second question? Sorry, Trustee Decker, and then we'll have you ask your question too.
I'm sorry, did you say me next, or is it?
Mine working now. Oh, there it goes. All right, sorry. Ms. Farr, just a quick question, and perhaps this is too much detail for you, but I figured I'd ask. In the 0 to 9 and 10 to 19 category, the number of cases that have popped up are significantly more than what we've had in MCPS and from what have been reported from the other schools. Can you give a little insight into what that means, what's happening out there in the community, that there's obviously a chunk of these kids that are not getting them in our schools. So what is that looking like out in the community, and why is that?
Yeah, so that brings up a good point. We definitely are seeing cases that are popping up in that age range that are not associated with MCPS schools. And we are seeing, we're seeing them starting to pop up in various different schools across the county. But we are also seeing them popping up in some of the groups of students who are doing the online only schooling. We've had a little bit of clustering going on there where we've got kids that are all getting together to do study groups for the online only schooling. And so we're definitely seeing some clusters there. But primarily what we're seeing is that it's families that, an older person in the family develops COVID from an exposure not related to the family, and then they are passing it on to their children.
Thank you. And then Trustee Mercer, then Trustee Decker.
The recent sort of uptick over the past week, how do you see our accountability for that? Are we part of that, or are we the cause of that or not?
It's a mix. So we're seeing a mix of kids that are getting it that are under the age of 19, but that's pretty close to being in line with the number of cases that we're seeing in other age ranges. So I think that is it contributing? Yes. I mean, as we have kids that are congregating, we're going to see more cases. But I don't see it being the largest driver at this point.
Thank you. And Trustee Decker?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Farr, for being here and answering everybody's questions. I appreciate it so much. I know we all do. I have a question about the charts that are on page 27 and noticing that there's a significant chunk of cases that are under investigation as well as that are community acquired instead of close contact. And I'm wondering if you would just speak to a little bit what's happening with that sort of open community spread where we don't exactly know where someone may have gotten the case. Is that a number that's increasing? Is that something that has stayed pretty stable? And then also, as we look at the upward swing in the second chart on that page, can you kind of refresh everybody's memory about what some of the kind of alarm bells or red alarms are based on what we've seen in other places around the country for like how steep that line looks when we start to, need to make significant changes?
Yeah, so let me answer your first question. When we're looking at where the cases are being identified, and you see that chart that shows that the majority of the cases are a contact to a case, and that's what we want to see is for the majority of cases to be a contact to a case. What that means is that we're able to rapidly identify those close contacts, get them into quarantine and out of the public circulation so that if they do develop symptoms, they're not spreading it to other people. And so that's what we want to see. When we're talking about community spread, like you alluded to, that means that we're seeing cases where we don't know where they got it. And we can't trace it back to being related to travel or being related to being a contact to a case. And that's where we start to have alarm, is if we start to see a real increase in that number. So far, that's been staying pretty steady between that 25 and 30% of our cases in general over time, over the last several months. And so that is something that we're keeping an eye on. When we're looking at the other chart that you were referencing, we're looking at the new cases that are coming in, and we're definitely seeing an increase in spread. And so that is something that we have to keep a really close eye on. We're watching our hospital admissions, how many people are really impacting our healthcare infrastructure, our ability at the health department to continue to do that contact tracing and that, case investigation really rapidly. We're actually currently adding additional staff again in response to this increase in cases. So when we start getting pushed to the point where we're not able to contact trace effectively, or our healthcare infrastructure is being impacted to where people who are having heart attacks or strokes are not able to get the care that they need because we're so busy impacting our infrastructure with COVID, then we have to start looking at pulling back and changing what we're doing in our response. Does that answer your questions?
Well, yes, although that, of course, is such a more extreme situation than really almost any city in in Montana has seen so far. And I'm wondering if you could speak kind of more generally to what sort of angle of incidents, I know, like what rate of increase would tell us that we were looking at a situation where we might be in a healthcare crisis, because we certainly don't want to get there and then back away from it.
Yeah, and that's actually data that's not included in these charts. I have access to an online computer system it's a web portal that tells me how many people are hospitalized, how many beds are available, how many ventilators are available, how much PPE is available. And if we start to see an increase in that where we think that the system's getting crunch, then we would be making additional recommendations. You're right that we're not in that situation yet, and our cases haven't increased exponentially to the point where we really have to worry about being in that situation. But if we get to the point where we're not able to bring on additional contact tracers, or we're seeing such a huge amount of community spread that we're just getting exponential spread of cases like they have in Yellowstone County right now, then we would definitely feel like we were in trouble. And so I know that a lot of people are not understanding or don't know the difference between what we're doing here in Missoula County and what's happening in Yellowstone County. But if you look at the incidence rates per 100,000 people for Yellowstone County, it's 10 to 15 times greater than what we have in Missoula County. They are not able to keep up with the contact tracing and case investigation at this point. And so they're doing the best that they can, but with those large of numbers, it's really hard to do adequate contact tracing within that 24 to 48 hour window. And so that's what we're watching, is some of the things that are not on these charts to determine at what point we need to make recommendations.
Thank you.
Did that answer your question, Trustee Decker? I see you nodding yes. And so if there are no other questions for Ms. Farr, I don't see any hands up in, oh, Trustee Vogel?
I'm sorry to keep you for one more question, Ms. Farr. Thank you. Could you just help explain on the difference between the data on page 24 and then on 27? How can the R value go down and yet the cases go up? Is that because the person is staying relatively isolated?
So that's actually a product of how the R value is calculated. The R value is a 14-day rolling average. So this R value is actually from 2 weeks ago. When I got the R values from my epi team earlier today, it's actually almost up to 1. And they informed me that based on the number of cases that are coming in, it's going to be above 1 and probably above anything that we've seen since the beginning of June by the end of this week. So that's the difference between those, is that the R value takes into consideration lots of different calculations that I don't even necessarily understand all of the variables that go into it. But it basically it's telling us what was happening 2 weeks ago and not what's necessarily happening right this minute because of the incubation period for the virus.
Thank you for clarifying that, Ms. Farr. Any other questions for Ms. Farr? Not seeing any other hands being raised. Thank you, Ms. Farr, for being here. We really appreciate it. We appreciate all that you've been doing and the amount of time you've been collaborating with Dr. Watson to make sure that we have up-to-date information. So we really greatly appreciate that collaboration. And with that, we'll hopefully turn you back to your family so you can have some time in the evening before you start another busy day tomorrow.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Okay, so thanks for the great questions on the data. I also wanted to report out to the board the confirmed cases within the school district. And last Wednesday, the state of Montana released a document. I left a copy at your seats, but also it's available on the internet. If you go to DPHHS, for those folks that are online, DPHHS, DPHHS, and then I think you Google Montana schools COVID, and this document comes up. But last Wednesday, the state of Montana broke down the COVID cases by county, by school. You'll notice when you go to Missoula County that the only school on there is Missoula. I just wanted to point out that has nothing to do with us not being transparent or not reporting our cases. In fact, every time we've had a case in Missoula County that's attached to our school, we've been very transparent about that case. We've notified parents as quickly as possible. But these numbers that were reported by DPHHS last week, those were gathered from the county health department, and our county health department hadn't forwarded our numbers yet to the state. So the next time they release one of these charts, which I'm assuming will be every Wednesday, you'll see our school numbers on there as well. But in the meantime, since our school numbers weren't reported last Wednesday, I want to report publicly here. So from the period of 8/26, which was our first day back of in-person learning, to today, 9/22, so in that time period, we've had 6 confirmed cases with individuals that are associated with MCPS. These 6 cases have involved 3 school sites. So we have about 18 school sites. So 3 school sites, 6 cases. And I want to give you the age breakdown. And I use these numbers because these are the same breakdowns that you'll see in the charts from County Health. But From age 0 to 10, we've had 0 cases. From age 10 to 19, we've had 4 cases. And 19 and over, we've had 2 cases. So that's data that we will continue to report publicly going forward. You'll also see it on the spreadsheet that is released by the state as soon as our local health department gets those numbers to the state. The next thing on my list is I wanted to give, just so you get a chance to hear from somebody else other than me this evening, I wanted to give Russ a chance just to talk briefly about the MCPS Online Academy and give you a quick update on that.
Hi, everybody. Hey, I appreciate the chance to talk about the MOA tonight, our online academy. In case you didn't realize it, we have as of last Friday, we have 1,929 students. And we raised basically a school of 2,000 in the last month. And it's been a real collaborative effort by a lot of people. And I think, you know, personally, and I admit to being a little biased, but I think it's a remarkable job. I think we've got a ways to go to include or improve our instruction, but I also know that each week we're getting better. At the K-5 level, we have 818 kids. At the 6-8 level, we have 467 kids. And at the high school level, we have 644. You might be surprised to know we have 85 staff members in the MOA. So that is a lot of people, and that was the challenge, to get that many staff members on board, basically in the last 4 to 5 weeks, and we made it, and we're up and running, and we now have 4 administrators there, and they are working daily to improve our delivery, lots of communication between parents. We're getting back to people faster than we were originally because we were just inundated with questions, but a lot of improvement. We've distributed over 700 laptops across the district. When we get more in, I think more will be distributed. And at the K-5 level, we distribute a lot of materials so the younger kids have things to work with. We've had over 800 sets of materials be distributed. So right now, just to give you some perspective, we're in our 3rd week with the MOA, the Missoula Online Academy. But really, at the K-8 level, we're in our 2nd week, because the first week, the very opening day, everything went wrong. Zoom crashed, lots of questions about passwords, and there was a lot of procedural things that first week. So the real instruction started last Monday, a week ago Monday. So we're in our 2nd week there instructionally, and we talk daily. There's lots of conversations between myself, the people in the MOA, and how we can do now the very tweaking kinds of things to add a few staff people here and there to make it run even smoother. So wanted to give you an update on the MOA. It's, again, I think it's remarkable work that we've done, you know, along with a lot of people. Thank you to the parents for being patient with us. We weren't up and running 100% at the beginning, and I think we're doing a lot better now. So we will continue to work on it. We'll continue to improve. And we are committed this first semester to having this MOA online. So thank you, appreciate it.
Okay, and a couple of other updates, and then I'll talk specifically about the schedule that's in your packet and the recommendation this evening. So in addition to educational services, as you're well aware, as a school district, we offer other services to our kids beyond education. So I wanted to give you some updates about those. Our food service is going well. You likely have heard from the feds that we have permission now to offer the free breakfast and free lunch for any child under the age of 18 through December 31st. So that was similar to what we had last spring. What I would tell you is that we're nervous about the number of lunches that are getting picked up. And so we do believe there are more kids out there that could be served. And so we're exploring other ways to try to get lunches out to kids, because we're not getting a whole lot of lunches picked up at schools, although it has improved recently. And when I say picked up, I mean a student that might be on remote learning. I also wanted to give you an update on mental health services. So as I think many board members know, we have contract services with a CSCT program, which is a school-based mental health program run by Western Montana Mental Health. One thing to note about that program, it's during shutdown last spring, it was difficult to keep that connection between those mental health therapists and students. It's improved a little bit this fall with students coming back. However, we still have concerns about not meeting the needs of enough students. We have some staffing concerns with the CSCT program, some staff not being able to be hired for some schools. And then the delivery model has really slowed down. And so Western Montana Mental Health uses that delivery model to really fund their program. So our delivery still needs to get worked out with the mental health services that we can provide students. Thankful to have kids back so we can improve that delivery, but it's really slowed down from previous years in terms of the number of students that are getting served. And then the technology update, we're still waiting on our shipment for Chromebooks, hopefully to have those soon. We know that we're giving out as many as we can, but we also have to keep some in the building for in-person learning, but we've been asking students to bring their own device to school when appropriate, or we've been checking out the limited Chromebooks we have. We're hoping by October that we'll get that new shipment of Chromebooks in so we can supply more technology for those kids that need it at home. I also wanted to give you just an overall update about staffing, just because it is a concern of mine with regards to being able to continue our program overall. So right now we're currently looking for another nurse. As you can imagine, that's important for us to have enough nursing staff. We're also, as was mentioned in the public comment, we're looking for substitute teachers, custodians, support personnel. But we have several open positions in the district, and I wanted to just draw attention to those because I think a lot of people assume that since we opened school and we were able to staff the MOA that we're doing okay, but we're really struggling in some areas. And I say this publicly just so that folks know that these staff positions are really important to us. We hope that folks in the community will be interested in these positions and perhaps even attract some parents in our buildings that might be interested in helping out as we continue to staff our schools. So noon duties, for example, these are the folks that work in the middle of the day and help out in the lunchroom or help out in classrooms. We have 8 schools that are looking for noon duties. Para-educators are support staff, so we have several para-educators in several classrooms supporting our teachers. We have 7 schools that are looking for still hoping to hire para-educators. 5 schools that are looking for kitchen staff, and then one school that's still looking for a custodian. I do want to point out that the start of the school year is always difficult to get full staff. We know that. We've seen that before. Dave can attest to that. The start of the year, there is turnover in some of these positions, and so we know that these positions are harder to fill. This year in particular just seems to be a little bit longer that we've gone without filling some of these positions. And so we want to make that more public, because we believe that there's folks in our community that really want to help the school district in some sort of way, and this would be a perfect way for folks to step up and help the district. Dave, I don't know if you want to say anything else about staffing. Did I say it all? Okay. The other thing I just wanted to mention, and Russ touched on this, so I just want to elaborate briefly. Educating students in a pandemic, we had no idea what that would be like. None of us have prepared for this. It's an interesting challenge, and it's something that I think we're all still learning. Russ mentioned that, we seem to get a little bit better every week with the MOA, and I completely agree. I think that's in a lot of cases we're getting better every week. I do want to mention how proud I am of our staff, not only our administrative staff, but mostly our teaching staff and our support staff, and how hard they have worked to really make the hybrid work in such a short amount of time. So if you think about the discussion that we had on August 11th, that was when we really made the final decision to start in the hybrid. And it was a really quick turnaround, not only to get the hybrid up and running, to get staff ready to go, but also get the MOA up and running. So here's some things, I know in a pandemic, there's all these things that we've never had to do before, so here's my short list of things that we've never done before. We've never stood up an online school for 1,900 students in 4 weeks. We've never done that, and that's definitely been a challenge, but we're doing the best we can. We've never hired 40 staff members. We had to hire 40 staff members to work in the MOA, and Russ single-handedly almost did that by himself in just a matter of weeks, and that was amazing with the help of Dave's staff and HR. We've never run an intensive block schedule, and if you can imagine taking all of our middle school students, all of our high school students, completely upending their schedule from what they had last year and creating an intensive block schedule. In some cases, we had to reschedule entire school buildings to make it work. We've never run an intensive block schedule. That's not something that I am aware that this district has ever done before, and it's something that we've done in a very short time and turned that around just to be ready for kids and try to make it safer. We've never asked our teachers to develop both in-person and remote learning at the same time and try to teach both in-person and remote at the same time. That's a tremendous lift. And it's not easy. We had a really short turnaround. Our staff is doing the very best they can at that, but it's a huge lift. We've offered some limited training where we've been able to, but we know that we've asked the staff to do a lot in terms of offering both in-person and remote for hybrid. And then we developed a myriad of procedures that we've never had before. We've never had bus procedures related to COVID or related to limiting spread. We've developed new procedures around activities. We've developed entire procedures around passing time and lunchtime, which is just all new for us. Food service and food service delivery, we now have procedures for what to do with suspected COVID cases and confirmed cases and close contacts. Those are just a few of the things that our staff has worked very hard in the last 8 to 10 weeks figuring all that out. So what I want to say to the board is I am really proud for what we've accomplished so far. I do know every week that we're into this school year, we learn something new. Russ pointed out that the MOA gets a little better every week, but I would say that same thing for our in-person learning. We learn something new every week. Our staff tries something new. They figure out something that works better than the week before. And so I know as the weeks progress, we are going to get better. But that's also part of the reason I'm encouraging us to move a little bit slowly through these next steps. And then the final thing is we don't have everything figured out. I know that we should. Some people think that we should have it all figured out by now, but we really don't. And we're doing the very, very best that we can. But I know our staff is working really hard, but we haven't figured everything out. And nobody's ever asked us to educate during a pandemic. So this is really, for us, this is new. And I think we're doing a really good job for what we've done so far, and I know we'll continue to keep improving. A lot of people ask me through phone conversations or emails, a lot of people ask me what they can do to help our district. Sometimes people want to donate money or sometimes they want to donate equipment. I always tell people the same thing for help. What we really need right now is we need a lot of grace and understanding and patience. And we also need some staff. We need folks to fill these staffing positions so that when we do bring kids back, that we feel comfortable that we've got enough staff available to make it work. So if people stopped and ask you, like, how can I help the district? Those are the things I would always tell them is, we just need your patience right now as we learn to get better and work through this, but we also need folks for staff if they're willing to help. All right, so I'm going to transition briefly to the schedule that's on page 21 of your packet. For the board members in attendance, I also gave you a colored copy, and then the version online is already in color, but I just wanted to make sure that I walk through this briefly just so we have basic understanding of the proposed schedule. And remember, this is something that we're working on and we're working towards. But I wanted to remind the board that we do have some programs that are already in full person, 5 days a week type of programs. So Seeley Lake High School is a great example. Assistant Superintendent Lodge and myself, we went to Seeley last Friday to kind of get a sense of how things were going in the classroom. And Seeley Lake has been on phase 2, and they are going every day, every student. They are doing a block schedule, much like our high schools down here in Missoula, but things are going really well. They have, you know, as you can imagine, they have fewer students in the high school, but they also have fewer staff, so it's all sort of relative in that respect. And Sealy's been in every day, every kid since they started. They did start a week late because of some construction that we talked about with the board, but Sealy, I just wanted to mention that one. Jefferson, you know, we have our pre-K programs at Jefferson. A lot of those programs started just as they normally would in other years because of the number of kids and because of they already, you know, went every other day in some of those preschool programs. So our programs at Jefferson are pretty much operating as they would have in previous years. And then the other ones that I wanted to mention, we have a few special ed programs around the district that we're starting to bring more kids back where appropriate and where we could make it work. So we do have some programs that are sort of outside of this schedule, and I just wanted to point that out to the board that this schedule covers about 90% of all of our programs, but there's a few programs that are outside this schedule that we're already bringing back to some degree in full time. So you can see the weeks laid out there. My recommendation, as you probably read in my rationale, would be to proceed slowly, but basically this recommendation gets us from where we currently are in hybrid and proceed slowly, starting the week of October 12th, which happens to be a short week because of MEA days or teacher conference days. So during that week, I'm recommending the hybrid plus, and the only difference with the hybrid plus is kids are going to school more often, but we still have that Monday as a remote learning day. So the hybrid plus for a few weeks, and then eventually starting on November 9th into phase 2. Now phase 2 is not business as usual. It's not normal school. Phase 2 still maintains that intensive block schedule. It still maintains a shorter school day, some of those sorts of things. So I want to be clear that really, you know, we're not recommending phase 3. Phase 3 would be back to the things that how it used to be, you know, before COVID. But phase 2 is sort of that step into phase 3 at some point probably in the long distant future. So the other thing I want to mention about this schedule is you'll notice there's a difference between K5, 6-8, and 9-12. As you can imagine, all of the confirmed cases we've seen so far have been at high school. We also have quite a few close contacts in a number of different schools, and most of that activity has happened in the upper grade levels. So I'm recommending under this proposed draft that we stay in the hybrid at high school a little bit longer, but we start to bring K-8 back a little bit earlier, just sort of to ease back into that every day, every student. The other thing I want to point out, there's nothing really magic about November 9th other than that's the transition period from quarter 1 to quarter 2. So I want to be really clear about there's an educational reason behind that recommendation of making that jump on November 9th. So not to go too far into the weeds on our block schedule, but our block schedule basically goes through all 6 periods over a whole quarter. So most of the students were in period 1 and 2 when we started the year, and now they've transitioned to period 3 and 4. And over the whole quarter, they will get to all 6 or 7 or 8 periods. But they will do that on November 9th. And then on November 9th, they restart that schedule. So they start back at periods 1 and 2 starting on November 9th. So that made sense educationally to restart more of a every day, every student on November 9th because of the schedule itself. So once they restart those periods in the middle schools and high school, they would be back into phase 2. That's the notion behind that date. The final thing I'll just point out, there's several rationale and considerations on page 22 and 23. I won't go into a lot of detail on these, but I do want to point out that the schedule itself is a gradual transition. I believe that, you know, it would be very hard to sort of rip the Band-Aid off and go right back to everything being normal. So what I tried to design was sort of a gradual transition to get us back into phase 2. I also wanted to point out that, and I alluded to this earlier, but I'll just say this again, there are definitely benefits and challenges related to the hybrid, We've recognized that, we've worked through that. Some of the benefits are that it does help with contact tracing and with sort of managing that contact tracing. It helps us as we work with the health department. The hybrid definitely helps with that. But I think the other thing is educationally, the hybrid is a tough model to sustain, primarily because our students, some students are engaged on the remote learning days, some students are not engaged on the remote learning days. I think that will improve as the weeks go along, and I love the fact that the teachers have a chance to check in with the students at least once a week during the in-person days. But as you will recall from last spring, we had some students that were completely disengaged on the remote learning days, and we did the best we can to keep them engaged, but that will continue to be a problem with the hybrid model, is those remote learning days. We're getting better on educational delivery on those days, but it would never be as good as in person. So that's probably the biggest drawback with the hybrid. There are also some other services on the hybrid that we're struggling with delivering. For example, the lunch service and the mental health services that I spoke of earlier can be difficult to deliver on the hybrid. It's nothing that we can't work out, and we'll continue to work on that. So I don't want the board to believe that, you know, we're just giving up on student engagement or we've given up on food delivery. We'll still continue to work through that and try to solve those problems, but the hybrid is a tough model to sustain because of the remote learning piece of it. So the last thing I'll mention, it's on page 23. There's been a lot of questions about having more students back in school. I just want to be clear that with increased student numbers, in some situations, it won't be possible to maintain that 6-foot physical distancing. We already know that happens sometimes in our lower grade levels. As I tour classrooms, you know, depending on the grade level and depending on the activity, sometimes students are closer than 6 feet, and we know that already happens. It'll be harder with more students in the classroom to maintain that 6 feet of social distancing. So we want to be very transparent about that and let the board know that we're going to do the best we can to maintain physical distance, but really we're going to be relying on other protocols, like, you know, making sure that we've got our masks and those other protocols to make sure that we can try to keep students safe if we end up going back with more kids. But what I want to point out is that the schedule as it exists on page 21 is a draft. Many of the switches and the changes in that schedule we're proposing because of educational reasons. I think that Cindy Farr gave you some good information regarding the case counts and the decisions that they have to make as a health department, but we built this schedule based on educational decisions, what we thought was best educationally for our students. But any changes to this schedule, anything that would come up in the community that would give us pause, we'd work closely with the health department and making sure that they were still comfortable with this phasing plan. And if there were any significant changes to the schedule, we would come back before the board before making any further movements. But we, as administratively, as a team, we're comfortable with this schedule moving forward. We think we can make it work based on the things I've presented, plus also assuming we can get some more staff to fill some of those open positions, we believe we can make this schedule work. So with that, I know that was a lot to digest, and I will pause and just see if you have any questions for me.
Any questions? Trustee McDonald?
Yes, I have two questions, just a little bit clarification on it. Number one, why is the high school longer in the hybrid model? And then second, what is the significance of Monday in the hybrid, plus what's the significance of Monday being remote and then rest of the days in person?
Yes, thank you, Trustee McDonald, for those questions. So I'll answer the first one. The educational reason why we're recommending the high school stay in hybrid just a little bit longer is because they are right in the middle of their rotation of classes. So I'll give you the Hellgate High School example. They just finished periods 1 and 2, that first rotation. Now they're doing periods 3 and 4, and then they're gonna finish the quarter with periods 5 and 6. So we didn't want to change their schedule until they got through an entire rotation, and they happened to finish that rotation on November 6th, which is why we're recommending educationally to leave the high school in that hybrid model a little bit longer. I also want to say, with high school, those are credit-bearing classes, so that's always a consideration for us before we upset the apple cart too much, that we want to make sure that we've got sort of a consistent schedule for those credit-bearing classes. In grades 6 through 8, they also run on intensive block schedule. You'll notice we're actually encouraging them to switch a little bit earlier. I discussed that with the middle school principals. They were comfortable with that switch at that time, realizing that they would still also be on their intensive block schedule, but they felt comfortable and felt positive about having kids back more frequently under that hybrid plus. And then last question that Trustee McDonald asked was about the remote learning Mondays. And it is an excellent question. I think part of the reason I recommended the hybrid plus is sort of to ease into the everyday, every student. I think under hybrid plus, it still gives our staff time to do the things we know we need to do to get ready for phase 2. So that being, any classroom adjustments we need to make, if we need to make any adjustments to the planning process for teachers working with other teachers on that Monday to really get ready for phase 2 and work through the planning process. So right now, our teachers have limited amount of time to talk to each other, but we want to increase that as we move forward, because they're going to have to talk to each other and talk to the MOA teachers more frequently to figure out where everybody's at, so that we can all sort of end up in the same place, if you will, by the end of the semester. So that communication between teachers is also another reason I recommended to keep the Mondays, is just to make sure that we had that time for our staff. So it is just a recognition of going from sort of 2 days a week to 4 days a week, and then eventually 5 days a week. It's just sort of a subtle transition into that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Trustee Avgaris and then Trustee Sturbis.
Thanks. Rob, you are speaking with the other superintendents in Missoula County, I'm assuming on a regular basis. Have they shared data on cases that they've had that you can share? And also, is Hellgate's on a every day from the start, if I'm correct? I'm not sure. Is that right, or are they on the same schedule as we are?
Yes, great question. So let's see, the schools that were on this hybrid model, the school districts, I should say, in addition to the MCPS, Target Range was also on a hybrid schedule, and then Bonner School District was also on a hybrid schedule. Target Range, I believe, has already made a switch back to every day, every student. I think Bonner, last time I talked to the Bonner superintendent, he was targeting sometime in October to make that switch. And then, as you're correct, the other school districts like Hellgate Elementary have been every day, every student since they started. We don't necessarily share case data when we speak, primarily because we believe that's a conversation between ourselves and the county health office. I think you will see their case data when this chart gets updated next, possibly even by tomorrow or next week when it gets updated with Missoula school data. I think you'll see the case data from the other schools. I did want to point out, and you can see it on this chart, I mean, if you just go off the large counties that are on here, so the large school districts, Cascade County, which is the Great Falls Public School District, they're on an every day, every student model. And they have been, I think they started about the same time we did, August 26th. Kalispell, Flathead County, they're also on an every day, every student model, as well as Yellowstone County. If you look at the large school districts, the ones that are similar to our model would be Bozeman and Helena. They are both doing hybrid models. Butte, which is on here as well, Silver Bow County. Silver Bow, I believe Butte is on an every day, every student, but they have adopted the intensive block schedule similar to ours.
And Trustee Sturbis, then Trustee Decker.
I can update on Target Range. They haven't gone to the all day yet. They were thinking of starting next week, but we've had one positive case, so we're still reassessing it. And I appreciate your comments about trying to improve the remote learning days for the hybrid model. I was just wondering if we could also, as we're working on improvements, if we could find a way to support the student athletes educationally, because they are missing, oftentimes for away games, their second period, that afternoon period. And at Big Sky, there was 8 periods. So, for instance, there could be only 4 in-person days for one grouping. And so if you miss one day, you're missing 25% of these in-person days. So during the springtime, sometimes Google Meets, the things could be recorded so you could watch it later. I think there's a lot of ways we can figure out a way to support them better, and I hope that would be in the plans. Thank you.
And Trustee Decker, you had a question for Dr. Watson?
Yes, thanks. First of all, I mean, I do just want to say I'm overwhelmed when I try to think about all of the details and all the work that everyone has been doing for just weeks and weeks and months now. And so really just deep appreciation to everyone for working to keep everyone as safe and as connected as possible. My question is about hybrid and the hybrid model and how we would move away from it toward the hybrid plus model. In the record, sort of the details in your, on page 22, item number 5, it says that the transition to any new phase will be dependent on consultation with the county health department. And the consideration is that the spread within our community and schools is at a manageable level. And I'm wondering if you could say a little more about kind of what that means. Obviously, Cindy Farr was speaking to that a little bit earlier, but that just seems a little bit different than how we were talking about the decisions that we would make for moving between phases a couple months ago. And clearly, we're all learning and doing the best we can and trying to make good decisions. But the idea of spread being at a manageable level seems different than looking for cases to literally be going down, which is what we had been talking about before. That's kind of part 1, I guess. Part 2 is if we are continuing with a more conservative approach that keeps us in hybrid and then hybrid plus, my concern has long been for what's going on for kids who aren't in school then, so what supports we are providing on those remote days. And you had mentioned that there's a lot of planning underway about some of those things, but I was hoping you could say a little bit more about that, particularly if we end up staying there longer, and if we have to roll back to a more strict hybrid at some point.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Trustee Decker. So I think I'll answer the second one first, if you don't mind. So I appreciate the question about what's happening on the remote days. I would tell you that we are getting better every week. Our teachers are learning a little bit more every week with regards to how to present materials on the remote days. We provided some training a couple weeks ago with some of our CARES Act money. We provided some training for our staff, both synchronous learning and asynchronous learning. And so we believe that staff will get better and better at that as the weeks progress. But that's something we continue to talk to our school principals about. And quite frankly, those discussions and those plans are best done at that level. So one of the questions I continue to ask principals when we meet with them weekly is, what's happening on the remote learning days? What are our expectations for teachers on the remote learning days? Have you communicated those expectations to parents and students so they understand what the expectations are on the remote learning days? I think we will improve, but quite frankly, we know that there's some students out there that are missing internet access and or devices. And so we need to solve some of those problems as well before we can move too quickly on that. So as I mentioned earlier, the computers are on their way. We were hoping to have them by August, but there was a shipment delay. So we'll hopefully have the computers here so that we can do more one-to-one, so that we could send a device home with every student if needed. And then the other one, with internet access, we still have the hotspots that we purchased last spring that are being distributed to students. We're also exploring other ways to provide internet access for families that need it through a variety of different methods, through Spectrum and a couple other places. So we'll continue to work on that. We believe it's important. So as we improve with remote learning, the other piece that has to go with that is we have to make sure we're not leaving any kids out of the equation. So, and I appreciate your comment, Trustee Decker. I think we have to be prepared for that, because there could be a point in time where, you know, the county health department and or the state of Montana tells us, you know, maybe all of us should go back to remote learning. And if that's the case, then we have to be ready for that. So we'll continue to prepare for that. The other services that quite frankly have me concerned are the food service delivery. We've asked Beach to kind of come up with a model to help us with that. So we know that there might be some ability of Beach Services to provide that food service delivery, so that we can improve the access to food, not only for our hybrid students, but also for our remote, our students that are in the remote online academy. So we're working on that one. And then the mental health services I spoke of, most of that's handled through a partner with Western Montana Mental Health, and we've been exploring with them ways to increase delivery of those services, even if it's in a remote fashion. So I don't have a lot of details on that yet, but that's something that just came to light this last week, and so we're working on that to improve those delivery of that, increase the delivery of mental health services, no matter what phase we're in. And then the first question you had was an excellent question. On bullet number 5 there on page 22, one consideration is that the spread of COVID-19 within our community and our schools is at a manageable level. So the reason I worded it that way, quite frankly, is discussions that I've had with the health department, and I think you heard a little bit of that tonight from Cindy Farr. They have limits and capacities with how much they can do in terms of contact tracing. And so we continue to have those discussions on a weekly basis, looking at the most current data, asking those same questions that you're asking. At what point do we get to a level where contact tracing is very difficult to manage, where they don't have enough contact tracers, they've reached capacity, or we have a significant number of cases in our school that we're overloading the system. So far, we haven't seen that. I'm not saying that it won't happen or it could happen, but those are the discussions we would have every week with the health department. And I would tell the board that no matter what we decide this evening, you know, if we get to that point where we believe we need to change the phase, we would be looking at an emergency board meeting, could be calling a board meeting within 48 hours to discuss this phasing plan. So I want the board to understand that this is an ongoing discussion with our county health office with regards to this phasing plan, and if they feel like we need to change and we need to make an adjustment, or if we feel that we've overloaded the capacity of county health, then we'd be back in front of the board very quickly.
Trustee Mercer?
Somewhere in the middle of that, you said that you asked the principals what is happening on remote days, and it caused me to realize I'm probably operating from a set of one, my own son, which makes me very nervous about all this, because my experience has been there's been 2 days of education, and there are not 3 other days of education occurring. Are there 3 days of education occurring in other places that I guess are just beyond my experience? Is there actually remote learning with online, synchronous or asynchronous? I mean, that's just not at all my experience. My experience was some paper, and it's, you know, and sure, I'm there at home, but if I wasn't there, so I feel a desperate need to get back because of my experience, but maybe I'm totally out of the water and there is broader and more education occurring on those days. So I guess that's my question. What is happening on those days at the K-5 level?
Yeah, so at the K-5 level, there are packets, as you experience. There's packets being sent home. There's a limited amount of in-person stuff going on with teachers. I think our teachers are figuring out ways to do that and get better. But I would tell you that currently there's not a lot of connection with the teacher on the remote days.
What's that? Am I on now? Okay, sorry. So I just have two quick questions. My first is going into phase 2. I believe facility rentals come back, so we're inviting the community back into our schools. Is there any reservations about that? And I think it's after 6:30 at night, if I'm correct. So is there any reservations around that? And then a little bit, last meeting I asked about principal feedback. They're your top administrators in all of your schools, and you had mentioned that principals and teachers' feedback really has been they want a set schedule, they don't want to bounce around. So coming back to this meeting, what is their feedback on this schedule? It is a set schedule. It gives them some sort of basis to plan around. So are they behind this schedule? Does this ease concerns for them, or is there still concerns around that?
Okay, so thanks for those questions. You're correct. In our long-range planning, we talked about restarting some facility rentals in phase 2. We're going to have to approach that very carefully. It would have to be after certain hours, and it would have to be comfortable enough that we had time where we could clean the facility before kids were back in there the next day. So that's not something we've necessarily decided on, but it's something we're working on. The second question you had was regarding staff feedback. I want to be very, very clear on this. There's mixed reviews on this schedule. I sat with my superintendent advisory council that includes both classified and certified staff. We went through this in great detail. We talked about the pros and the cons. There's definitely mixed reviews regarding this. I would say staff are most concerned about the ability to physical distance in the classroom with more kids. That was a concern. And then the second piece that came up over and over again with staff and with principals is just the lack of staff that we have available in K-5 specifically. So remember, we have our in-person learning, and then we stood up this MOA Academy, and that required a lot of staff. So we are really stretching our staff, our limited staff, very, very thin. And so what I heard again and again from the K-5 principals and the staff from K-5 is just their concern about having some of these staff positions that are unfilled and being able to manage the protocols with more students in the building and not quite enough staff. So that's a concern, and that's why I highlighted those staff positions, because we are going to have to work really hard over the next few weeks to get those staff positions filled. But I'm only touching the surface on the pros and the cons and the things that I've heard. Our principals, each principal spent time with their leadership teams to discuss this. I would say the most recent feedback I've heard is staff is concerned about the increase in cases in our community, our ability to manage confirmed cases within our schools, the contact tracing and the close contacts. I would also say that staff is worried about, as I said earlier, just maintaining those protocols when we have more students in the building. So that's a concern as well.
Any other questions? Oh, Trustee McDonald and then Trustee Sturbis, and then Trustee Mercer. Did you have a question? I think you were up next. So Trustee Mercer, then Trustee Sturbis, then Trustee McDonald.
Sorry, just very shortly. And so if I hear you, what you're saying then is that part of the delay in going back to Hybrid Plus, you're almost saying is necessary. It's staffing driven. You're not able to go back, say, in week 6, the way things sit right now. That's question 1. Question 2, just to make sure, the reason that detailed learning instruction can't be given on the remote days is because they're teaching class, right? And so it's an inherent flaw of this model, right? And that's not really fixable. Those are 2 questions.
Yeah, the staffing concerns are a concern for us. I think I've talked about it probably enough this evening, but what I would tell you is that we start school every year and we may not have full staff. I mean, we experience that. We do the best we can, but staffing changes every week. And so we start every year without full staff. I would tell you that what Trustee Avgaris mentioned is having something predictable really helps us if we can start to plan now for needing more staff, then we can really focus on that in the next few weeks and make sure that we get some of these staffing positions filled. We could go back in week 6, but it would be a stretch based on, it's specifically at K-5, based on the number of staff positions that we have open. And then the second point is exactly correct. I mean, our elementary teachers are teaching from basically from 8:15 to 2:10, 2:20. They're pretty stressed, pretty tired at the end of the day. Remember what we've done in elementary, we've tried to keep them in cohort groups. So that means that the teacher is pretty much with them that entire time. That's a little bit different than we've had before, where they might go out for PE or they might go out for music or health enhancement, I apologize, rather than PE. But what we're asking of our elementary staff is a really focused amount of time in a short period of time, and they're pretty exhausted by the end of the day. So one of the things we thought might work is doing a check-in from 2:30 to 4 o'clock with some of their remote learning kids. But that's difficult to do. Staff are stressed and exhausted. And the other thing that going forward, if we stayed in the hybrid longer, one thing we can do is encourage staff to start doing some of that asynchronous stuff. So as a staff member, I could create a video or a lesson on a video, post it for my students that are on remote learning. And some of that's happening in the high school and the middle school, but it's very difficult to do that, especially if we have kids at home that don't have devices. So that is another big trigger, is if we had more devices, and as soon as those Chromebooks get here, we'll all be happy because we can get those distributed and the remote learning could improve. But that's why you're seeing a lot of packets, quite frankly, at K-5, is that's one area where we don't have a lot of extra Chromebooks.
And Trustee Service, then Trustee McDonald, and I was just checking to see if Trustee Decker had her hand up, so.
My question is who's responsible for the, when kids are in quarantine, how their education's going?
Yep, we are responsible for that. The teacher that has them in class, that classroom teacher. Interesting thing about our intensive block schedule, if they end up switching during that quarantine, then it's a new teacher that's responsible for that student. But just much like a student that might be at home sick, that's our responsibility to keep them going and keep them updated. But that's our responsibility. With the Missoula Online Academy, same thing there. The teacher, if we had a student in quarantine in the online academy, it would be the teacher they're assigned to.
But just to follow up, you're saying their teachers are exhausted. Now you throw that in. I just wondering, do they get any principal support? Or?
Yeah, so, boy, I wish we had a school principal here this evening, but we definitely support teachers in any way we can. I know our principals are working hard as well to do that. So, and I don't want to discount it. It's not an easy process. You just asked me who was responsible, and I kind of answered matter-of-factly, we're responsible for that student, but it's not easy. We'll do the best we can to keep that student going, and we can use some remote learning to do that. In some situations, we could even, turn a camera on in the back of the classroom if that's available and have the students still participate in class, but it's not easy. It's not perfect. And that's something we're going to have to continue to get better at, because that will continue, no matter what phase we're in, that'll continue, or we may have students on quarantine.
Trustee McDonald?
Okay, first and foremost, I just want to say how much I appreciate what we're all doing as far as trying to get through this, and I'm just asking questions that are thrown out at me. And so with that being said, I want to kind of go to the number 6C. I've had several parents say to me that their children are really struggling. And so my question is what are we doing about the kids that are really struggling with the remote learning? And if they have questions and stuff, right away, how is that being taken care of?
Yeah, so I would answer in a couple of different ways. So first of all, the Missoula, and you're talking about the hybrid, but I want to answer this for the online academy as well, just because as we were getting the online academy up and running, it was a challenge because we hadn't checked in with those kids in person, and so it was a matter of getting their passwords and getting their equipment. So there were several days, and I know that trustees may have heard from parents. There were several days in the start of the online academy where we were struggling in getting those kids up and going and rolling in classes. That gets better every week, as Russ pointed out, but I wanted to mention that because I also know that you may have heard from some of those parents as well. The did you say 6B or 6D? B, I think B.
6C, where it says however.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yep, 6C. So I was somewhere in the middle there, 6C.
Okay.
Okay, yes, so here's what I'd learned today in talking with Casey Ballou, our union president. So what the teachers have really, and I heard this from Casey, so I don't want to put words in her mouth, but what the teachers have really appreciated with the hybrid is they have a chance to check in with those kids each week. And so if you've got a kid, maybe it's at the end of the alphabet, you don't see them till Thursday, but they really haven't been doing anything Tuesday and Wednesday, you have a chance on Thursday to check in with them and talk to them about how important remote learning is, talk to them about keeping up with their classwork that is sent home or that's posted. So that's been really nice because when we were last spring, when we were in full shutdown, we didn't have any ability to have that connection with kids, that in-person connection. So that's a big benefit of the hybrid, is that we have that chance to check in with the kids once a week and ask them what their struggles are. Maybe it's an internet issue, maybe it's a computer issue, maybe they don't have any support at home. So I think there's a lot of problem solving going on at that level between the teacher and the student, but it's not perfect. We know that we have kids that are disengaged. This is something our principals continue to talk about with their staff and try to identify who those kids are and try to figure out what their needs are to try to meet those needs so that they can do well in that remote learning.
Okay, I just want to kind of just add on with, like, and I guess I'm not really familiar with exactly how this works. I don't have kids that are going to school, but if a student is doing their work and they have a couple of questions on what they are working on, what is the process that they do? Are they wait till they can talk to the teacher and just hold that off till they can talk, or what's the process with that?
Yes, so several of our schools and levels have established some what they're calling office hours. And again, I want to preface this in saying that this is not easy because sometimes happens at the end of the school day or on the Monday of remote learning. But they have some time set aside where they could check in with a student, either virtually or over the phone, to get some of those questions answered. That's also happening in the Missoula, the MCPS Online Academy. So the structure of their day is fairly similar. They've got some direct instruction, some time where they work by themselves, and then they also have some office hours. So that's happening both in the Online Academy and in the hybrid model. There's just limited amount of time in the hybrid model because, as Trustee Mercer pointed out, the teachers are basically teaching 4 days out of the week, but they do have some time either after school or in the morning when they could check in with kids.
Okay, thank you. I just, again, want to stress that I really appreciate what we're doing to try to accommodate everybody.
And Trustee Olperson has a question?
Yes, my question, well, it's more of a concern. When you pointed out the different school districts that are similar to our size and they're in full day every kid, and the case numbers really concerns me, and I wonder if you have thought about keeping middle school in the hybrid as well and just sending elementary. So as a parent, I have elementary and a high school student, and I do see the need for every day for my elementary children. But the case count really concerns me about that, and that makes me really nervous to move forward, because I was even nervous moving forward to the hybrid model when we move forward with that. So I just want to know if that's something that you thought about, is keeping middle school and hybrid as well, so that we can really watch our own numbers as a district.
Yes, and I want to clarify too that the chart that I gave to the board and is available on the internet on the DPHHS website, that shows the various schools and the counties. I want to be clear that Missoula is not on here, and when you have Missoula on there, you know, we're only one part of Missoula County, so there might be a laundry list like this for Missoula as well. So I do think it's important to note that the case counts that you see on that chart, you know, there's a lot of variables there. Those counties all have their own level of COVID-19 spread within the county that could be very different from Missoula. So I'm not sure, it would probably be an incorrect assumption to assume that just because we're on the hybrid model that, you know, we have fewer case counts, but we do. We have fewer case counts, but I don't know if that has anything to do with the hybrid model. It very well could. And there's probably folks out there that say it does have something to do with the hybrid model, but you know, I don't know if that's true or not. I do know the schools that, like I said, that have gone back every day, every kid, are the ones that are on here, but we'll have to wait and see how Missoula County compares. We could have just as many in the list when we look at the whole county, but I just don't know that. One of the things I wanted to point out about middle school is, you know, they're also doing an intensive block schedule. They do a transition around that time. I think they told me it was the week of October 5th or sometime in there. They do a transition to a couple new classes. So it is sort of right in the middle of their schedule. And yes, we talked this through with the middle school principals as well about sort of staying in the hybrid a little bit longer. It just seemed to make sense to us educationally to try to get kids back in the building as much as possible, only because in middle school, even less so, kids are not able to, not all kids, but some kids are not able to handle that remote learning as well. It's a little more significant in middle school than high school. And so when I talked to the middle school principals specifically about this schedule, I recall what they said was that having students back in the building, they felt was a better time, and they wanted to actually transition at the same time the K-5 was transitioning, which is why I put them on the schedule that way.
Any other questions? Seeing none, then in the agenda, there is a recommendation from the administration that the trustees approve the attached draft schedule for transition to phase 2 with the understanding that it would be reassessed on a weekly basis after consulting with the city county health department, and any significant changes would be brought back to the board for consideration either at a regular meeting or a special board meeting, depending on the circumstances. So at this point, I would entertain any motion from any trustee concerning this topic. Trustee Lorenzen?
I move we accept the administration recommendation as printed in the agenda.
Is there a second? Seconded by Trustee Avgaris. Is there any board discussion? Trustee Lorenzen?
I'm really pleased with the amount of questioning we did with Rob. I think, and we can certainly go on and talk some more amongst ourselves. I think it's really important, first of all, to note that Missoula County Public Schools is making their own decision with advice from Missoula County Health, but not simply implementing directives from Missoula County Health. And I think that as trustees, we need to make this decision in an active way and own this decision. And so I think if people want to continue to talk, I mean, I'm leaning toward the recommendation, but I don't have any kids. And the one thing that I keep feeling is missing is, what does this feel like to the children? And so I just am really pleased at the level of questions we had, and I hope we'll have additional discussion. I especially like to hear from parents on the board.
Any other board discussion? Trustee Mercer? And then Trustee Decker, I think she had her hand up too.
I'm still back and forth. The whole thing makes me very anxious. My parent experience is that my kid thinks it's a 5-day weekend, and I am clawing to fight that, and I'm at home with him those 3 days doing that. I think I'm gravitating towards accepting the professional recommendation. If I ran the world, I would say go 5 days a week, or phase 2, week 6. If professionals are telling us that's smart, not smart, but I guess I would just say that although this is draft and temporary, at some point, what we're doing right now for K through 5 is not adequate in my mind, and we need to get back, as long as it's epidemiologically acceptable, we need to get back to doing 5 days a week of education. So that's where I am, I guess.
Thank you. And Trustee Decker?
Yeah, I have to say that I am appreciative of the change in, or somewhat change in tone that I've heard toward trying to be conservative, because, you know, we're in a situation where we have more cases in Montana than we've had at any point throughout the whole pandemic right now. And the largest increase has been in the past couple of weeks. And so the thing that makes me anxious about supporting a plan, even to stay as conservative as we are currently, is that we don't have a clear, I don't have a clear sense of what would bring this back to us, really, if this was to change significantly. But what the only metric that we're hearing about tonight has to do with being in a health crisis. That means that people who have a heart attack can't get health care, and that makes me a little nervous, to be honest. But I will say that the thing that is the most troublesome about the hybrid model and about staying in it longer has to do with the gap that children who aren't in school are experiencing. And I think that's a predictable gap, and that we haven't really done enough to plan for that reality for kids. That the kids who are in the online academy, and my son is one, yes, there were a few bumps, but you know what? It is getting better all the time, and there has been a significant amount of kind of hand-holding and support and really pushing toward making that successful, and his experience so far has been pretty good. But I think for the kids who are in the buildings, our focus has been so much on their in-building days and making that as safe and successful as possible, which of course is a critical component. But the reality is that those kids are now going to have like 6 weeks of 3 days a week of not being in the buildings, that we haven't really put a lot of community or district thought into what's happening for them. And that situation of being in the buildings part week, which seems to be a situation that there is some community agreement is a safer situation. That is something that's likely to exist for at least another month from now. And then if cases continue to climb as they are right now, it's very likely that we'll have that in place much longer. So my thought is that we need to put the same amount of energy into thinking about the remote days, the home days, that we've put into planning for the online academy, so that we can look at that situation as a safe and educationally valid situation going forward. Because that's really, I mean, this pandemic's not going away anytime soon. We're going to be with it for like up to a year or more until it's broad. And so knowing that we have to think about those remote days as part of the school experience for all kids, how can we provide remote learning hubs or safe study hall places where kids can get a little bit of support in a separate location in a safe, supported kind of way, and where food can be? How can we be thinking about community partners differently? Now that we are getting some practice at being in the buildings in a safe way and doing the online academy in a safe way, the third piece of this is those remote days. And I think that I would support staying in hybrid. And I think a lot of people would a really long time if it felt like we were doing a good job on those remote days.
Thank you. Trustee Service?
I have to say, I really echo what Trustee Decker said. I was listening to a podcast where they were talking about situations in different parts of the country. And for their hybrid models, remote days, they would be going online, and they would be in the classroom, but on the computers. And I've mentioned this to Dr. Watson, but of course the problem is we don't have the tech support yet. But I think when we're thinking about strategic planning in the future, this is our moonshot or whatever. We need to figure out how to educate students no matter what, because this situation is our future. It's not going to go away completely. And this would allow, if we could have kids come study remotely anytime, they wouldn't have to worry about being sick. They could just log in and get the instruction that way. So I really hope that we will work on this as much as Grace recommended, and I really appreciate those comments. Thank you.
Oops, trustee Oldperson, then trustee Abgaris.
To answer trustee Lorenzen's, as a parent, I have 3 in elementary, go Russell Bears, and 1 in high school. And my boys are all different just in together, but they're very academic and they make time, but I'm not there because I'm working as well. So I can't help lead a lot of it, and I do trust a lot into the babysitter to help lead remote learning days. But I also understand, and I let my children know this, we are in a pandemic and this is not how education is going to be forever. But right now, lucky you, this is what you're going to do. You're going to make sure you do your packet. You're going to read and do X, Y, and Z before you move on to the PlayStation or whatever. But I think this is for me, as a parent, this is how I see it. I'm like, you are getting education. Granted, it's 2 days a week, and I'm happy with that. And they're in the building with their teacher, and their teachers have been so awesome at reaching out to me as a parent to say, this is what we're doing. You know, this is what you can do at home. And I think that's really helpful for me, especially on those remote learning days. And I just know this is just part of the path of this pandemic as a parent, is that my children are home on those remote learning days, and I'm okay with that because they're not out in the community getting possible sickness. And it's gonna happen. I mean, it's not gonna happen every day. It's a chance we take for me even going to work, for me coming to the school board room, for me running to the grocery store. So I see it as a part of life that we have to do what we have to do to survive every day. And that's part of me keeping my children home on those remote learning days, and it's okay for me to have them home on those remote learning days. I do see the point of access. It's hard to have access. I'm fortunate we have technology at home. We have access to the internet. We have access to food. So, but not everybody has that. And it's my neighbor who doesn't have that, and we help her. So, you know, it's a tough situation. But as a parent, I'm okay with the remote learning right now because it's not going to be like this. And yeah, we're going to lose some of the, what is that called? Where you lose some of what you learn. Regression. But like, this is what happens every 100 years, or, you know, something's going to happen to where we have to deal with this. And I think that this is this generation. And I do feel for those seniors, because I have a senior. And I do understand that they are missing out on different things. But I think that it's not going to happen to the next 4 years of every senior for the next 4 years. It's just this class. And I think we really need to listen to these seniors on how they want to make their opportunity or their senior year happen. And I think that goes to the point for athletics. That is a huge part of if a senior athlete, something that they've done. My son has played sports from first grade on. And the fact that I can only have 2 people go to his football game and we're a family of 6 is not okay. So as a district, we need to look at that. But I know this ain't permanent. This is temporary. So that's how I view it as a parent.
Thank you. Is there any other board comment? Oh, yes, sorry, trustee Asgaris. Thanks for putting your hand up again.
Thank you. I'm forgettable. It's all right. No, it's okay. You know, I have this document that shows the cases around the state. I have a little bit of a different perspective on it. I'm actually encouraged by these numbers. You look at Yellowstone County, which by far has had the most cases of any county, probably × in a general community. The health officer today said that they have so many cases that they're having a tough time tracking contact tracing. And I just did some old 1985 math here, and they've had 12 cases in their elementary schools, 1 in their middle school, and 9 in their high schools. And the 12 in elementary schools have been spread over 11 elementary schools that they have. So their community spread, their spread in their community in general is a lot greater than ours. Their health department's having a tough time making sure that people are quarantined, and they're still 4 weeks into school seeing one case, maybe two cases in their school, and they're getting a hold of it. So that, to me, from that perspective, is encouraging. And obviously, they're in school every day. The concern is not just our kids being in school. I asked the question of our health officer because it is a question that we have to think about, is the kids that are not in school, they're doing something, right? They're going to be in pods, they're going to be seeing their cousin, they're going to be doing things that are not in school. So is it safer, and this is a question we've talked about in this board a few different times, is it safer for kids to see each other 4 or 5 days a week in a controlled environment that we're wearing masks, we're doing the best social distancing we can, we have an intensive schedule, we're very cleanly, the rules are being followed? Are we going to have a better success with that than if we're doing 2 days a week and then they're going to a pod for 2 or 3 days a week, or they're going to their aunt's house? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. You can come up with your own conclusions. I don't think anybody can answer that question, but it is something we have to come up with, because what we're seeing now, the health officer said today, is that these pods are seeing clusters pop up in Missoula County. So that's something else to think about as we discuss this. Personally, I agree that we're asking a lot of our teachers and our administrators to start with this hybrid model. It's, in my personal opinion, it's the worst of all the models. Remote learning, at least if you go full remote learning, there's a structured schedule 5 days a week with a teacher, and they're getting on Zoom calls every couple hours. Hybrid, it's an impossible task to ask our teachers 3 days a week to teach these kids and stay engaged with them when they're trying to teach kids in class. It's just impossible. We can't, they just don't have the time. So unless we ask for us to hire a whole bunch more teachers to focus just on our kids 3 days a week, the logical next step is to get them back into class, even this 4 days a week, to be better. So I appreciate Dr. Watson, the thought through the Hybrid Plus. When you first proposed this, I thought, why didn't we think about that? Why don't we give the teachers an extra day of the week and our kids in school for 4 days a week, and it gives a little bit more lapse, and maybe it does even help us with some contact tracing if a case pops up. So I think it gives us a 4-week slow roll into phase 2, and it seems like, to me, a very good model. So that's all I got to say.
Thanks. Any other board comment? Not seeing any, then it's, Trustee Oldperson?
Well, Dr. Watson, you mentioned Casey, and I wonder if, I'm pretty sure she didn't give a public comment, but I really would like to hear what she has to say and be able to discuss that more with the board members.
That's not really. But I'm sure if she has something to say, that we'll hear from Ms. Ballou. And so it is time now for public comment on the decision that the board's about to make. And so I see there's a number of hands up that were up earlier for public comment on non-agenda items. I'll assume, since there are hands up, that they want to make public comment on this action item. And so the first one is Allie Diamond. If you want to unmute and make public comment.
Yeah, can you hear me? This is an Allie Diamond. I'm Allie Diamond's husband. My name is Marty Cardos, MartyKardos. A couple things I want to say is that one thing is that what's happening in Missoula right now is 100% and easily predictable. So a few months ago, or a few weeks ago, a few board meetings ago, we discussed this, and I and others pointed out that when we start putting people into buildings with one another, whether it's controlled or not, as careful as you want to be, when you put people into closed spaces with one another, and that's what we're doing with thousands more people right now than we were over the summer and in the spring. When we do that, we see cases go up. That's an easily predicted outcome of putting people into buildings with one another, whether we're careful or not, whether we wear masks or not. So what's happening right now is a direct consequence of both what the university is doing, what the school system is doing, and what businesses in Missoula are doing. Opening up, putting people into close contact with one another, cases go up as a natural result. The other thing is that in the school system, there are no good solutions. The pandemic, frankly, sucks in every possible way. There's really no good way to educate kids part-time, not in person, remote, in pods, etc. Obviously, the best way to do it is to have them in school every day with a normal teacher as normal. That's not going to happen. And I think that suggestions of putting kids back into school, every person, every day, is frankly not a good idea from an epidemiological perspective. Obviously, it would be a good idea for the educational purposes of kids, but there's a great cost to doing that. And that cost is that more people are going to get sick and more people are going to die in our community. And frankly, it's not worth it. And third, I would like to know what the criteria are that the school system is going to use for moving among or between phases. What's it going to take? How many more cases is it going to take in Missoula on a daily basis back to phase 1 or to phase 0? And the last thing is, given the trajectory of the pandemic in Missoula right now, I think the school system needs to be very well prepared to educate every kid every day in remote, because that's the inevitable outcome of what's happening right now with the epidemic. Thank you.
Thank you. And Marissa has a hand up. If you could state your first and last name, and also we're asking folks to keep your comments to 3 minutes.
My name is Marissa McClintock, Marissa, MCCLINTOCK. I don't even know what to say to you guys anymore. You didn't listen the first time. I feel like I'm just going to be in the Zoom where it happened, where people from above decide to make decisions based not on facts, based not on what's going on in our community and what our community wishes, based not on the needs of our school community. What are you basing this on? You said so yourself. There's nothing magical about the date in November. There's nothing magical about numbers that would suggest that this is a good move. There's nothing magical about what the county health department said that would suggest that you do this. So what are you basing this on aside from convenience to you? And I'm not willing to risk the life of a student. So I feel like you're going to make a decision in this room today that's going to kill a student or teacher, and I'm not okay with it. Additionally, I feel like saying that distance learning is not something we can get right, remote learning, hybrid learning is not something we can get right, sells short an amazing staff. I think we're doing a great job. Yes, we have a long ways to go still, but our kids are actually learning to be more resilient, to ask questions, to know when they don't understand something. And that's all a skill that they're learning sometimes for the first time. There's a lot of hand-holding, even in middle school where I teach. But I had a kid call me and actually ask a question. I could tell he was nervous about it, but we went through it together and he got where he needed to be. And I feel like that's what we need to do here. We just need to get where we need to be. And completely open is not where we need to be. And we know this because everyone who's done that has seen negative consequences. I don't understand where this is coming from. Maybe you can explain it to me. You told me specifically earlier that more kids congregating were bad, that challenges to contact tracing were bad, that numbers were up, but that we were going back to in-person. These things don't go together. Please, I beg you not to pass this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. And it looks like Jennifer Hall has her hand up and Tom McClintock has his hand up, and then Lucia Olson. So Jennifer Hall.
Good evening. My name is Jennifer Hall. I'm a local pediatrician practicing here in Missoula. I have addressed the board previously regarding return to school for students enrolled in MCPS. Tonight I'm here on behalf of myself as well as 12 other medical providers in the Missoula community who provide care to pediatric patients. As a whole, we stand in support of Dr. Watson's proposal to return students to further in-person instruction. As we all know, schools provide vital resources for our children. The schools and services they provide are fundamental to child and adolescent development and well-being. These services cannot be adequately provided in a remote environment. Because of these and many other considerations, we as your local pediatric healthcare providers join both the executive committee of the Montana chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics and the national AAP in strongly advocating for in-person education for our children whenever it is safe to do so. Beginning the year in the hybrid model has provided an opportunity for staff and students to adapt to this new normal of school. It's provided students with some of the benefits of in-person learning, which has been very well received by students and the attendant benefits of that. But it has left students to participate in remote learning 3 days a week. And we've all heard and share concerns about how difficult that is for everybody. Unfortunately, remote learning, particularly for our younger students, is not an adequate substitute for in-person education. Additionally, remote learning accelerates already difficult racial and class disparities and causes undue burden for students with learning difficulties, technology access issues, as well as for working parents. When this model persists for prolonged periods of time, as it has during COVID, the educational gap grows ever wider. We as medical providers understand acutely that the risk of COVID is real. We also know that there are risks of providing inadequate or unequal education to our children. We acknowledge that there is inherent risk in sending students back to school, regardless of whether that is hybrid model or full in-person learning. We do strongly feel as pediatric healthcare providers that the benefits of children attending school in person as much as possible strongly outweigh the risks of COVID infection. We have strategies for keeping children safe in school, which we're all well aware of. Using these strategies will allow us to reduce risk and still allow our students access to high quality and equal education. At the end of the day, we have a responsibility to our children and adolescents in this community to make safe, full-time, in-person education a priority. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And I believe Tom McClintock is next, and then Lucia Olson, and there are several other hands that I will acknowledge in just a minute. So, Mr. McClintock, if you want to unmute.
Yeah, good evening. As you noted, my name is Tom McClintock, and I am speaking out against this proposed plan for many reasons. First, as noted, there is no information in the plan as presented about how to ramp back down quickly, as Ms. Farr said was going to be necessary should the district proceed with this plan. She said you need to prepare to transition back very quickly. Our case numbers are going up dramatically, and the R value, as she said, will be up over 1 and will continue to rise over the next 2-week period. So our numbers are up, our R value is going up, we're seeing more spread. We have a huge spike in cases, and now you think that this is a good plan to move forward? If a huge spike in cases isn't giving you pause, as Dr. Watson said, what will exactly? Is it going to take a kid being admitted to the ICU or one of your lunch aides falling dead of COVID? What do you want to kill someone in order to ramp back down? And on that note, if you're already having a hard time finding staff and admitted that, and yet you're confident that you'll be able to find them when it's even less safe to work for MCPS, how? Where are you going to find these people? Are you going to magic some Oompa Loompas into existence? That doesn't make any sense. And one board member previously noted that Frenchtown is back full-time in person. Frenchtown High School is a smaller high school than any of our 3 high schools, and they confirmed 3 new cases today. So what's that going to say about, the chances that our high schools are going to do okay, let alone our middle schools or our elementary schools, where kids are already having a hard time keeping their masks on, at recess or to eat lunch when they're taking their masks off. And lastly, Dr. Watson said that with this many more people, we're going to have a hard time reaching, the 6-foot social distancing. You're having a hard time hitting 3 feet of social distancing with the partial numbers right now. You're not going to get 2 feet or anything resembling social distancing with everyone in the same classroom. This is going to kill someone, and you're going to be to blame if you proceed with this plan. So there you go.
Thanks. And I think the next person with their hand up is Lucia Olson. Ms. Olson, if you want to unmute.
Okay. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Oh, here comes the camera too. All right. So I just wanted to clarify again that my name is Kim Olson, Kimolson. I'm on my daughter's account for some reason. So again, I'm a 5th grade teacher at Paxton, and thank you for allowing me to voice my concerns. I strongly oppose recommending phasing into the hybrid schedule in the next 3 weeks. The data that we have is still inadequate. There was a long article in the Missoulian that talked about how testing is inadequate in our state, and as we know, is across the country. A hybrid plus schedule would also immediately double the density in our classrooms. And so there's definitely a really strong double standard about how we're treating social distancing, because as you noticed, you're in your boardroom right there. If you can visualize a classroom half the size of the room that you're in right now, and add 15 children with masks, and then closed windows when the fall comes along, and not to mention poor ventilation systems in almost all of our old buildings. None of that's been updated. Our custodial staff, our custodial teams have also still not been increased. So of course, by immediately doubling the density in our classrooms, we're not going to have adequate time for hand washing. The viral load from all the respiratory aerosols will increase dramatically throughout the building as well. I also find it highly concerning that there's never been any public recommendations by our own county health department to mandate that everyone be tested before entering the school buildings. I mean, our local restaurants and local businesses are having higher standards regarding social distancing than our own public school buildings. I'd like to also respond to Dr. Jennifer Hall's comment about pediatricians demanding we get back to full time. Again, these are doctors who are in very clean environments, and would they willingly spend 6 hours straight in a small enclosed classroom with up to 20 children who can't socially distance? So I'm just really concerned about the health and safety, not only of myself as an older teacher, but of all of my colleagues and as well as the students. And I did take it upon myself to get tested for COVID before the school year started, because as a public school teacher, I could not in good conscience choose to be willfully ignorant of whether I'm an asymptomatic carrier of this virus or not. And I plan to get regularly tested. Unfortunately, I don't have the luxury of knowing whether any of my colleagues or students are carriers, because as we know, children are asymptomatic transmitters of this virus. And as we know too, the majority of teachers and public comments from the earlier board meeting, we wanted remote learning. So please, let's make the right decision. We need safe working conditions for our faculty and safe environments for our children, and we need to stop the spread of this virus. Thank you.
Thank you. And there is someone identified as CI. If you can unmute yourself and make public comment, and also let us know your first and last name.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Courtney Imhoff. And I just want to talk to you as a spouse of a teacher and also as a parent. I want to thank all of you, first of all, for everything that you've done. As someone who is married to an educator, they have worked tirelessly to make sure that the kids who are in the hybrid model are getting the education that they need. There's been a lot of discussion tonight about remote learning and what it is not meeting the expectations of a lot of parents. I just am curious as to whether there is an opportunity for us to utilize some of the CARES Act money to support the teachers who are teaching in the hybrid model, get them access to some additional bodies to provide content or additional content in general, so that those teachers truly can be prepared to teach in that remote hybrid model and meet the expectation of those parents, because I don't know that that is really going to happen as the teachers stand today, because they just don't have the resources that they need to make that happen based on the expectation levels of not only the administration, but also at the parents. So I just want to make sure that the teachers know from a parent perspective, I appreciate everything that you guys are doing. And I see my husband work. He has literally spent hours and hours and hours trying to prepare your children. And if he's not meeting those expectations, it's not because he's not trying.
Thank you. It looks like the next person who has a hand up is someone with a phone number whose last 3 digits are 527. If you want to unmute yourself and let us know your first and last name and make your 3 minutes public comment. Thanks. If the person on the phone with the last digits of 527 wants to unmute themselves and make public comment, it looks like that hand's gone down. So the next person whose hand is up is Matthew Rich. Mr. Rich, if you'd like to make any public comment.
Yes, thank you. I guess I'd just like to, in part, agree with Dr. Jennifer Hall, but with a caveat. I agree that in-person instruction is very important for members of our community that are disadvantaged, the disabled, the poor, folks like that. I have friends that are paraeducators who speak about their students' needs and how in-person instruction is very useful for them. I think, however, we are endangering those communities and we are serving them less adequately by inviting the entirety of the student body to attend in a more normal fashion, where we are lessening our ability to directly serve the people who need in-person instruction the most when we allow privileged individuals, such as myself, who is able to be at home with their children and assist with their children's online instruction. There are plenty of people in our community that are in that privileged position who can provide the adequate education in conjunction with the online education. And by us moving to a hybrid plus model, we're not serving our community better. What we should be focusing on is how can we specifically address the needs of disadvantaged portions of our community. And ultimately, what's going to serve our students the best in the long run is ending this pandemic or reducing it to very insignificant numbers. And we need to ask ourselves if we are part of the solution to that, or if we're contributing to the problem and contributing to how long this pandemic is lasting in our country and in our state. Earlier in the pandemic, we cracked down very hard in Montana, and we saw our numbers drop to 0. That was not seen in other places. Other places in the world have had harder crackdowns, and their numbers have dropped down to the point where they're fully open now. So these half measures are hurting us more than they're helping. I believe that the hybrid model right now is doing okay to service. We don't have very many numbers. Let's not bump it up too fast. Let's be part of the solution. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. And it looks like Shannon Judge has a hand up. So, Ms. Judge, if you can unmute yourself and make public comment.
Hi, my name is Shannon Judge, and I am a teacher for MCPS, and I would just like to speak to some of the successes from our hybrid model and some of the struggles that I fear will continue and potentially get worse if we continue to the hybrid plus model. I'm currently in a smaller classroom, and so even with my 10 students, I am not able to socially distance 6 feet. We're lucky if we get 3 feet. And I also don't have a sink in my classroom, and I share a sink and bathrooms with anywhere from 60 kids if we're full students to right now we have about 30 students, 40 if a first grade classroom is using our bathroom as well. And so right now we have 1 sink and 1 bathroom available for the boys and the girls, which is manageable with small numbers because 1 student can wait outside while the other one is in there so that we're not cross-contaminating between classes. But I worry that when we are back with our students and there are more students needing to use the restrooms at the same time, we won't be able to socially distance or manage those kids in the bathroom, as well as when we wash our hands before we eat breakfast and lunch. Right now, we're able to, between the 3 classes, take turns and manage those students while they're in the breakout space washing their hands. But with all of our students, I fear that we'll lose instructional time or time eating because we are waiting for the other students to wash their hands when we're sharing 2 sinks. And I know that there are other schools that have the same issues that we have. I would like to say that I love having my students in person on those 2 days, and we are working as educators to make those remote learning days meaningful and engaging for the students, and we would just ask for grace. We are going to be transitioning to those digital activities, which hopefully we can include more videos of ourselves so it feels like the kids are there. But I would just caution us to move slowly and just consider those smaller classrooms that are already struggling with distancing and our safety measures, and it will just get worse with more kids. But thank you for all of your hard work, and thank you for the opportunity to comment tonight.
Thank you for your comments. And I'm checking in the participants list to see if any other hands are up.
So, hi, Chair Holland. Hello, board.
Hi.
I have extra powers on this meeting as a co-host, but
You
I have
do.
lost the ability to raise my little blue hand. So
Okay, I didn't see your hand, but thank you for popping in.
sorry about that. I hope you'll excuse my butting in here. Casey Ballou, president of the Missoula EA, and I think your conversation today was great. I mean, you hit on some of our struggles and some of our successes, our hopes for what things could be. And I think the biggest concerns, and there are a couple of them, is the need for safety and to make sure that we maintain systems that are working well. And the need for some ease, right? You heard Courtney say it well. We're working super hard, long hours. It's not easy doing any type of the instruction that we have teachers doing right now, be it all online or, in the hybrid model. One of the big concerns that I think we have, and you guys spoke to this also, is that once we start to phase up, we stop problem solving where we are and start thinking forward. If you want good quality instruction in these current models, we need that time and that, slow and steady kind of rhythm to be able to do that. This is only our second all remote Monday, and those are the times when, our in-person group of teachers actually has a chunk of time to do some planning and to catch up on all the other work that, they're trying to do. I also worry that when we phase up, it's almost impossible to convince people to phase back, right? We don't really have any big trigger points that we're paying attention to. I know we're consulting with the health department. We want to make sure that not just our kids are safe, that is absolutely our priority, but that our staff is safe too. And with a lack of subs, you know, there's a pressure to come to work, to do the work when you're sick. And we can't have that if we're going to be safe. So I know 3 minutes goes super fast. I'm happy to chat with any of you at any time if you have other questions, but I encourage us again to, you know, stay where we are for a bit longer, give us a chance to really polish it up, make it shine, again, get into that rhythm, and to just take it slow, and like Shannon said so well, to have some grace. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And it looks like Jason Schaefer has a hand up. So Mr. Schaefer, if you want to unmute and make any public comment.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I think a couple things right out of the gates really important for me, like Casey just expressed, is just allowing everybody to have an open dialogue about this. And I know for me, I'm a former educator 15 years ago out in the Lake Washington School District in Seattle. So I know, educators, where you're coming from. I'm here to tell you, I think we have a great leader in Rob Watson, okay? My challenge right now with all of this is I have an 11-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 6-year-old. So I have a kindergartner and a 6th grader, 2 transition years, which are extremely important. We have got to get our kids back to school. 100%. I have, and my wife, we have jobs where we can afford to do this monetarily, and I've emailed Mr. Watson about this, and he's been great getting back to me. I appreciate that, Rob. I can do this monetarily and time-wise. I'm not worried about me. I'm worried about the single mom or the single dad out there. I'm worried about the grandma and the grandpa that are watching over kids. We have got to get our kids back to structure, and I know there's risk, but we need to understand there is risk every single day in life. And here's the deal. I think Rob has explained it very well to all of us. This says, okay, October 12th, here's how we're going to try and do this. Try and do this, okay? 4 days a week. And if we have a challenge and we have a spike in cases, okay, we might have a spike in cases and we're going to roll back. And what's the rollback look like? I don't know. It might be 2 days a week. It's got to be something, but we have to be able to adapt. And that's where we're at right now as a world. There are no knowns right now in our world. And Rob, in my opinion, is giving us a pretty good map to go forward. And I'm not saying it's the best. I don't know what the best is. None of us know what the best is. I'm just saying I'm going to put trust in some of my leadership and say, let's go. Because I know my kids need it. They need structure. They need friends. They need people educating them. I put trust in educators. I put trust in administrative leadership. And I think we have to get to that point now. And why is Missoula always the last one? Just drives me crazy. There are people, Yellowstone County, look at it, guys. Look at them. I believe they're going 4 days a week. Bitterroot, Frenchtown, Lolo, come on now. Let's go. We can adjust as necessary. So, like I said, thank you for the dialogue this evening. I hope you choose to, look at my side of where I'm at with my children. Everybody's got a different story going on, and I respect that. But you know where I'm at.
Thank you. And it looks like Ashley Ostheimer-Hilliard, if I've pronounced that correctly, has a hand up. Ms. Hilliard, would you like to unmute and make any public comment?
Great. Thank you. You did get it right. My name is Ashley Ostheimer-Hilliard, Hilliard for the last name. I have, since my last comment in a board meeting, really tried hard to explore the nuance of where we're at and explore how complex this is. And I want to thank the board and the leadership here that has been so involved in having a great discussion and asking questions. For me, that's such a reassurance to see based on where we were at a month ago, that the conversation means a lot to me as a parent. Thank you. I have also an 11-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 5-year-old, 6th, 4th, and kindergartner. And I'm not currently a single mom, but was a single mom relatively not too long ago. And my heart is also with those people who are looking at how to make this work. This is extremely difficult. I would also go back to my comment from a month ago and asking for improved learning spaces. And I appreciate the comments that have been made so far about giving time to work out the bugs here. My concern right now is in moving back and forth. My concern for my family is that my employment will be impacted if I continue to not be able to support my children. I have a limited amount of capacity to be able to put them in care. That capacity is going to end pretty soon. I'm not going to be able to do that anymore. And I know that I am privileged in having that opportunity. I'd like to explore some more community options. How are we supporting our out-of-school care providers? How are they getting supported from the school? What can the parents do to support the out-of-school providers? What can the parents do to support the school? I've tried to keep an open conversation and open dialogue with the teachers and the principals and those out-of-school providers. Even when homework goes missing, even when backpacks come home destroyed, even when my kid, when I pick him up, is missing shoes, that we're all in crazy times and we're doing our best. We haven't had a chance yet, 2 minutes and 25 seconds, I'm watching it. We haven't had a chance yet to explore the digital learning options with that remote learning, as Shannon said. I'd really like to see that as a parent. I know that we want to get back in person. I just think that we can perfect this a little bit more and we don't have to rush it. Let's see, looking at my notes, I would also caution in comparing Yellowstone to Missoula without some context. We need to be careful with that and make sure that we're getting some context there in between those two counties. We're not the same. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for those comments. And it looks like Stephanie Rollins has a hand up. Ms. Rollins, if you want to unmute and make public comment.
Yeah, I have the privilege of being a kindergarten teacher in the district, and I also have a senior and a 4th grader. And I also have had my family affected by suicide. And I have not heard mental health spoken of very much tonight. And I have a great concern that staying in the hybrid model that we are currently in is going to increase mental illness. It creates financial hardship on families. This is hard to do. I am lucky enough to be able to use the child care that the district has provided for teachers. And I'm in a okay financial situation, but I know a lot of people who aren't, and that creates stress, which in turn can create depression and anxiety. And those are high risk, especially living in Montana, going into the winter months that we're going into. I'm really, really concerned and worried about that. Strained relationships on families, it is hard. I can teach 18 kindergartners way easier than I can teach my own 4th grader because of that parent-child relationship. This is creating stress and strain on those parent-child relationships, which is the most important relationship out of all relationships. At lower academic growth from only being in school 2 days a week, that has long-term effects. Kindergarten, a lot of times parents take the philosophy it's only kindergarten, but they're learning very important foundational skills and that they need to be in school learning. There's no better way to learn than being with their peers and their teacher. Loneliness and isolation that kids are feeling. I'm thinking of, this is for K5, the childcare that the district is providing. What about those middle school 6th graders who are at home by themselves all day long because their parents have to work? The stability and structure that kids need to be in school, knowing what that does for them, knowing what to expect each and every day. Increased child abuse not being reported because teachers don't know their kids as well. When they're only seeing them 2 days a week, and they might not recognize it as well. And then kids are getting together because parents are working. So I feel like they're still getting in contact with other kids. My child's going to a child care program during the day with other children going to other schools. So they are mixing. So I really would agree with Dr. Watson, and hopefully that we can move towards that, the next phase. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. I'm looking to see if there are any other public comments. Any hands raised? Sorry?
Hello?
Hi, there's someone who wanted to make public comment, but we can't find you in the participants list. So if you can unmute yourself and state your first and last name, and then go ahead and make your comment.
Yeah, this is Aaron Fortner. Am I unmuted here?
Yes, you
Hello?
are.
Yeah, hi. I certainly appreciate all the concerns, and I think that a lot of them are legitimate. But also, I would certainly say that I don't think we need to be mistaken in the assumption that any full return to school will be able to prevent or mitigate any level of risk by simply wearing masks and social distancing. From a teacher's perspective, that's virtually impossible in the classroom. I'm a little bit suspect of the classroom averages that were reported. And quite frankly, I know that a full return to school would put many of us in the high school with students, 25 to 30 students in a room for 2.5 hours. The New England Journal of Medicine came out with a pretty convincing study about the length of time in which the virus stays airborne, which is purportedly 3 hours given appropriate conditions. In that context, I don't see how it's really possible to maintain the safety of students and teachers. I know it's certainly a complicated issue, but I can't say that we can go ahead and feel safe with a return to school, knowing full well, despite the capitulations of CDC, insisting at one moment that it is not airborne and that the guidelines are appropriate and that we should be symptomatic testing asymptomatic tests, and then to turn around and say something entirely different. I think that's certainly concerning, and we certainly need to proceed with a little bit of caution. But at the same time, I think we need to be really clear about the anticipated or presumable safety that will be keeping students or teachers from getting sick. And that's, without even discussing significantly increasing case numbers in Missoula County. The governor's public meeting today cited Missoula County as one of the concerning counties. And this all being said in good faith, that we would certainly look at this and think about things moving forward, rolling back things potentially if we're to see significant rises in cases. And it seems like we're seemingly going the other direction. And I think, as Casey astutely mentioned, once we roll into a full model, that's going to be really hard to step back from. So I think it's going to require a bit of a little bit more thought. And yes, the answers certainly don't come easy, but I don't think it's suitable to say that the answer is to return us to school with the premise that it will be unsafe, because it will be safe, because it simply is not going to be. Thank you.
Thank you. And Paul, I've lost access to the Zoom account. Is there any other public comment? Okay, I've been told there's no other public comment, and so we have a seconded motion to approve the attached draft schedule for transitions to phase 2, with the understanding that the recommendation will be reassessed on a weekly basis, and any significant changes will be brought back to the board for consideration either at one of our 2 October board meetings or at a special board meeting, depending on the circumstances. So with that being said, all trustees in favor of the motion, please indicate by raising your hand. And Trustee Decker, I apologize, but I've lost the feed, so if you could let us know if you're raising your hand at this time.
I am not.
Okay,
I am
thanks.
not. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, all opposed, please indicate by raising your hand. And so that is Trustee Decker and Trustee Oldperson who have voted no. The other trustees present at the meeting have voted yes, so the motion carries. And so thank you for everyone for that good conversation concerning this agenda item. We now move on to item number 9A, but before I do that, I want to see if everyone would be agreeable to this. Under B, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, there are a number of information items where there's a lot of supporting information in the board packet. Would everyone be okay with just having everyone review those materials? And if need be, if there's questions, either call me or Dr. Watson, and we'll add it on to the next agenda, since those are not action items. And so that would leave us with this one last action item, and then just announcement concerning the trustee vacancy. Is that okay with everybody? I see all heads nodding. So with that, Pat, there's a very long explanation about something we had seen before to make sure that the unprocessed products how that would apply to the Egg Center at Big Sky.
Exactly. Thank you, Chair Allen. So the two questions from the policy that is attached beginning on page 28 regarded the reference to unprocessed about 3/4 of the way down under geographic preference, and then under Buy American, what was interpreted by significantly higher. And this was a real good question in the context of this policy, because the policy allows us to apply a geographic preference. And as it applies to our processed food at the VOAG Center, the question was whether or not we could apply that geographic preference, which we can. And as referenced in the background to the agenda item, the CFR that's actually referenced at the end of the policy addresses the term processed, and in the context of this policy and the language of the CFR, which is the federal guidelines, the Federal Register, the unprocessed, locally grown or locally raised agriculture products means only those agriculture products that retain their inherent character. So it shall not be considered as changing the product if it goes through the process of cutting, peeling, slicing, dicing, cutting, chopping, etc. So and very specifically as applied to the Egg Center, butchering livestock. So we would be able to apply a geographic preference there. In terms of the significantly higher, that's language that is part of the guidance recommended, the federal guidance that's recommended, but as far as our council could determine, that the determination of what would be significantly higher would be determined by the district. So there isn't any guidance as there is with the process, but I think those were two good questions, and sorry it's taken so long to clarify those, but I think the policy is ready for review by the board and consideration.
Any questions for Pat? Seeing none, then let me turn back to my agenda. So the recommendation is that the trustees approve the first reading of Board Policy 8205 on procurement of school food and authorize its posting for public comment. And that would mean we would be hearing back on second reading on October 27th. Is there a motion to approve the first reading and authorize posting? Moved by Trustee Oldperson and seconded by Trustee Sturbis. Is there any board discussion? Seeing none, thanks for following up with that, Pat, since the Egg Center is a really vital part of our school experience. Any public comment? I'm not seeing any hands raised. So all trustees in favor of the motion to approve the first reading of the Board Policy 8205 and authorize its posting for public comment, please indicate by raising your hand. And I can now see Trustee Decker again, so that is unanimous as to all trustees present. And as I indicated, thank you. We do have written support for the information items we were going to be discussing, so please review them and contact either Dr. Watson or me if you'd like to put this on the next agenda on any of the information that was provided. And then finally, 10A is the Board of Trustee vacancy. As you know, there is a vacancy on the board, and applications the administration had set as closing last Friday, but we received no applications. So I don't believe it takes board action, but my recommendation would be that we extend it for 2 weeks, since we have 60 days from the date of the resignation to fill the spot. So that would still get us out to about November 1st. So if that's okay with everybody, we'll just go ahead and extend the application and let everyone know that there is a vacancy on the school board, and we would love to have that position filled. So thanks. Any questions about that? Trustee Service?
What happens if nobody applies?
Per the statute, then the superintendent of schools, Aaron Lipkin, would appoint someone. It's actually in a statute explains that that's what happens. I don't think it's ever happened in a number of years, but that's the procedural fallback. So, Trustee Vogel?
Is there any particular area that this person would need to come from, like how I did?
They have to live in Missoula County Public Schools big district. So like you and I and Trustee Service and Trustee Wake have to come from a different small independent K-8. This is someone who lives in Missoula County. So, and in MCPS. In the elementary district. Yeah, so it covers a fairly wide area of Missoula. Good question. Trustee Decker?
This is probably just because of MCPS's crackerjack tech and communications team being so on it. But I did go looking for the trustee application earlier today because somebody did contact me with interest, and it was no longer on the homepage, but I'm assuming following our okay of it being 2 more weeks, it'll be back there.
I'm very confident it will be, but thank you for noticing that it had gone down. Thank you so much. Any other final comments? And we do take public comment on non-agenda items both at the beginning and end of our meetings. Or is there any public comment on a non-agenda item that someone wasn't able to get to at the beginning? And it looks like Mr. McClintock has public comment on a non-agenda item.
I would like to just say that aside from Trustee Decker and Old Person, shame on you, and I hope that you understand the ramifications of what you voted for. Because if someone gets sick, if a child is left with a lifelong chronic illness because of this, it is on your hands. And if a staff member dies because of this, it is on your hands. It is on your conscience. On your head be it.
Any other public comment on a non-agenda item? I don't see any other hands raised, so with that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for being here.